the good stuff.
Welcome back, everybody, to Goodwill Podcasting with Connor, Dan, and Stone, your movie podcast that today is talking about the newly released film from Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis that is Here, the experimental picture about the display of time through the dinosaurs and multiple families throughout the years. Very interesting film. Excited to talk about that. But we decided to focus this conversation around Tom Hanks in his careers. A lot of movies from the 90s, which is when he had obviously his most popular era, I would say. But Connor is out today because of personal reasons, but no worries. We have a beautiful replacement in KT Movieruntime, who's going to talk about these films with us. First-time guest. We always love saying that. We always love having people on the podcast for the first time. Thank you for being here so much.
Thank you so much. I'm hyped to be here. I was listening to several of your episodes in the past, so exciting to get to go through that fourth wall. I loved your episode on Westerns, which I feel like are underappreciated. I do a podcast myself called What If I Don't Like It, where I get people to come in and watch a movie they've never watched, but they think they just will hate, or try a genre that they might hate. And so that Westerns episode, I was like, oh, I empathize with this. It's a great genre. Why are people so hung up on this shit?
Yeah, I feel the same exact way. I think we had Brandon on for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he loves them too. I just think people have so many notions in their head of what a Western is, and this is boring. It's not relevant. But there's so much good about them, and so many different ways you can spin them, and so many things they have to say. It's a good genre. That does have There are a lot of bad movies in it, but there's a lot of good too. So.
Hey, I love horror, and there's a lot of bad horror movies. So
yeah.
It's funny talking about the Westerns episode because me and Dan were talking about it before we jumped on. Not necessarily that episode, but the fact that, which reminds me of this episode we're talking about today, was that the fact those were actually good movies that we were talking about. When last week we talked about the Spidey Sonyverse, it wasn't very fun. I'll admit it. On my second rewatch of Madam Web, I was running out of time, so I watched it on 2x speed at the very end. So the Pepsi Cola sign was coming down very quickly. She got blinded very quickly. So no 2x speed with this episode.
Yeah, no, but sometimes those movies, God bless that 2x.
Yeah, that's the only time, because I use it on Netflix, because I do fast forward sometimes on YouTube and stuff like that. I'll hold it and fast forward videos, but that's the first time I've ever done it while watching a movie and on Netflix, which a lot of people hate, but it actually did, like you said, it came in handy.
Yeah, I just did a showing of Nosferatu, and it's not super long, it's 90 minutes, but if you do it at 1.25 and it is a silent film, no one will notice, and you'll shave 20 minutes. It's palpable.
That's actually really informative because I have to watch that, or I want to watch that for the new one coming out. So there's 8 or I saw someone talking about there's 8 or 9 of those movies. I don't know if that's true or not. I feel like that was too much.
It's been remade.
Yeah, the iterations of it that you could consider a remake of it. The only one worth talking about is the Werner Herzog one, and then the original.
Yeah. Those are the two I've heard the most about. And then also, completely off topic of what we're talking about today, I still think a lot of people are talking about award season. I mean, we're talking about Here, which I don't think is going to get any awards, but I was listening to a podcast, was you know what, maybe. And I think, but this was before they actually watched the movie. But I still think that Nosferatu, I think, has a chance still. It's just, in my mind, the reason why nobody talks about it is just because it's horror. That's just flat out. It's a horror. It's not like Silence of the Lambs where it's a horror, but it's more than that. It can disguise itself, which Silence of the Lambs is more of a thriller to me. But people are just, I still think that has a chance, and I'm excited for someone someday to watch it. I signed up for some sweepstakes. Who knows? Maybe I'll go to the world premiere. I'm getting emails now randomly, so hopefully that's worth it. Random emails from Focus Features.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, because that Silence of the Lambs, probably the biggest Oscar win for a horror movie, although thriller delineated. Parasite, also big winner, but also thriller delineated. It's almost like once a horror movie gets accepted in an award ceremony, people are like, oh, it's a thriller, it's a psychological drama, it's not a horror.
But would you wouldn't classify Parasite as a horror movie, right?
It's, I kind of do, because it is so tense and so thrilling, and you've got deaths, and you've got monsters in actual people. So yeah, I kind of feel like it is a horror movie. It doesn't need to go full into like there's an actual fantasy element of it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times too, it's like the violence that is a differentiator, or like the gore, etc. And I mean, when the violence is there, it is pretty brutal. So like I see your point.
Mhm.
I think Parasite's interesting because it does so much. Like it has so much going on.
Ooh, there is a chance that there's a horror movie nominated this year. That I was just looking at an article because I knew this. There's 6 movies supposedly that have been nominated ever for Best Picture that were horror films. And when I was looking it up, I wanted to rehash my memory. There's a movie this year, not Nosferatu, that people think might have a chance, which is possibly The Substance.
Yes.
Possibly. And they think because it actually did so well at the box office, they think like that just helps more eyes to get laid on it, basically. And I think more than Nosferatu, which is more of a traditional horror story, this one has a lot about social commentary, about beauty standards in the industry. So that really lends itself as well to possibly getting nominated for that. But the 6 films, I was gonna say the 6 films are The Sixth Sense, Black Swan, Get Out, Jaws, The Exorcist, and then Silence of the Lambs is what I'm seeing here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll eat my hat if Substance doesn't get a technical for its special effects because of the way that they did the CGI onto actual people, and then most of it is practical. Like that's gonna get a nomination in some sort of way.
I love seeing all those behind the scenes photos that like Margaret Quallett and Demi Moore posted like over Halloween. It's really funny.
I also think in terms of in terms of the actors, Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley, like each could get a nomination, especially Moore. I just think it shouldn't be ignored. But it really is. I mean, it's one of the better movies of the year, and it did very well, right? It's doing very well.
Yes, it's doing very well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I hope it gets recognition.
Maybe a good. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it would be sad if Quaid gets nominated and then Qualley and Demi don't.
Do you imagine I don't think the irony.
I saw someone say like I saw like a breakdown of how much time they actually had on screens, and like Quaid was only like I think maybe 5. I don't know, maybe between 5 and 10 minutes, and someone's like, I swear he was eating shrimp for like 23 minutes.
I mean, Ned Beatty got a nomination for 2 minutes 30 seconds, so like it's possible.
Yeah, that would be something.
I'll say we could if you guys want, we can go from our like speaking about film about women, we can go right into our first film about Tom Hanks, because the ones that we're discussing today is A League of Their Own, Philadelphia, Saving Private Ryan, Road to Perdition, and then the new film here, like I said, A League of Their Own. Really fascinated by this. I know Dan is a man of history. Obviously, he knew about this. And Katie, I think this was your recommendation as well. So you had watched this before. I had never watched this. And I was just talking about it with Dan. I love it. I go into a lot of movies blind. All I knew is there's no crying in baseball. Now, here's the thing. He could have been talking to an emotional dude. I didn't know. That's all I knew was that line from this film. So this was really educational to me about, these women during World War II who took up the mantle, the vacancy of professional sports when everybody was off at war, and they created a league of their own. A really important story to tell. I found out that I think they couldn't tell the story in all of its, there's a lot of nuance to the story as well. I think this is more of a Hollywoodization of it. It's still important and very special in American history. But I believe about a couple of years ago, they redid it again, the story again on Amazon Prime. And I haven't watched that. And I think I would like it more, because this movie for me, I did have a problem with that Hollywoodization. This is the only movie for me where I think the story is so interesting. There's so much that could have been told there that I was curious about the entire time watching it, that its potential is that it didn't get to is what hurt it for me personally.
What are you referring to specifically?
So the story between the sisters, I believe, is made up. I looked that up. I was like, is this true? And that's kind of what the focus of the story is. Whereas I was thinking about everything in the background. Like one obvious example of a plot point or plot, yeah, a part in the story that I really was intrigued by was Dottie and when her husband comes home. And there's this whole thing where I can't play sports, when my husband's back, I have to go back with him. This is not where I'm meant to be. I was very intrigued to see what that would be like, a conversation between, a husband and a wife about her trying to chase this passion that she has or this thing that's happened since her husband has left for the war. I was so invested in that plot element. And he comes back. I'm like, here we go. That's just not shown at all. And I think that's such a big element of this is accepting women in this, this unknown field, no pun intended. And I just don't get enough of that in this. Like, I want to, like, there's this one thing is there's this sequence where I can't remember the guy who's trying to pick up the entire league and run it. He is surprised when someone's like, oh, no, we're canceling the league, after the guys get back. And to me, watching that seemed kind of obvious. And honestly, to the players and to that operator, it should have seen, because that's why this league happened in the first place. There's a vacancy. When the war is over, it's more than likely going to end. And he seemed super shocked by that. And it's never discussed from the player's perspective. That fear is never there. And I would have loved to have seen that and them to know that maybe, this might not last forever, but it's more of the story is so broad that the specifics that I was hoping to see are never explored, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, you make a pretty interesting point around the idea that you could go further into what the women were feeling. And I feel like the Amazon series does that. With regards to the Jimmy plotline and the Bill Pullman plotline, there's a twofold, I think, on that, which is that Bill did this as a role which was kind of extra. Penny Marshall couldn't get somebody cast in time, and he was like, yeah, I'm available. We're friends. It's not a big role. And then the exec said we wanted more of that plotline, and she was worried that it would become too much of a love story. And she's like, no, I want this to still be about baseball. And for me, when I look at whether or not the girls are fighting, whether or not this becomes Dottie and Kit makeup, that's the key reason this works as a sports film that people want to watch. Because for a lot of sports films, you think, will the Bad News Bears win? Of course they're gonna fucking win. They always win. That's how sports movies work. And like, it's not even about who wins the World Series at the end of this. It's about, did Dottie drop the ball on purpose? Will they make up? Won't they make up? It becomes about that instead of about the winning or losing of the game. And that I feel like is a key part to why this story endures so much and why people love it.
Yeah, and I think so when you're talking about Hollywoodization, the movie doesn't get made without that. There's people aren't seeing it without that. If you
especially in 1992
or 42 or Miracle or Hoosiers or list any sports movie, We Are Marshall, they all have that. So I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think it's a problem. Also, this movie really just to me is it's really about baseball, and they got actors who could actually play the game. And that to me shows, because I think for this to be effective and to not feel hokey, it would only feel hokey if you felt like these people didn't fit, but they got actors that fit every single character, and they're actually playing the game, and it's believable. And I feel like you can go into the world and just kind of exist there very easily. And then everything in terms of just dramatic tension, they're not going to make a story without that. So I just feel like the authenticity here is what kind of shines through. And I mean, the league in real life, it went into the mid 50s. So I don't think
54.
It's not like the war
I was paying attention to that.
It just automatically ended. So, and it also just feels like everyone is having so much fun. Especially like Rosie O'Donnell, just in her element. The accent is hilarious, but yeah, I just think it's a very interesting movie, and Tom Hanks, he's kind of unhinged here. Like it's
Yeah.
really interesting performance, and I think
Yeah.
what is fun with what we're talking about today is every single one of these movies, his performance is so different. Like, and I don't think of myself as the biggest Tom Hanks fan, but I've also watched a lot of his movies, and I feel like I maybe have underappreciated him almost in a way, or like taken him for granted. But when you really look at these movies and what he's doing, the performances are just excellent. But he's kind of like despicable and unlikable in this movie in a lot of ways. But he's also just like a career baseball guy, and he feels authentic. So I really like this movie.
Yeah, when you asked to pick Tom Hanks movies or this theme of movies, I looked at what you guys had picked, and I could have easily picked Apollo 13, which is technically my favorite Tom Hanks movie. But I was thinking, like, archaeologically, when we look at Tom Hanks, there's this pre-comedy period, there's this like rom-com period, there's the war period, and then there's like I guess post-war reconstruction period for him, and like his comedy in this role is so anti, the guy, America's sweetheart. And yet this really is, you think of Tom Hanks, you think of baseball, and then this is really the reason why he feels so American.
Yeah.
His character was really, I'll say his character was really interesting to me because throughout the entire movie, I didn't know if I liked what they were doing with him because he's not a nice guy and he really doesn't change that much. So I was like, do I want him to change or do I kind of just like this grumpy dude who kind of accepts that women are decent at baseball? And I'm like, I like the route they took. He's still kind of an asshole.
Without Tom Hanks, I don't think it works. I think he is too rude. If you cast the wrong actor in that role that doesn't come off as charming, you have to pick someone like Tom Hanks.
I think what's interesting here is you can kind of draw a parallel between, in a way, what you see from Tom Hanks here and what you see from Denzel in Philadelphia. Like, in the way that neither of them are likable, and both of them are incredibly flawed people, but they really help the story move along, and they really bring out a lot of positives about the story as well. But I think like when you look at them each as individuals in a vacuum, like they're pretty unlikable people. But they each have a purpose in the story. And I think you also understand with Jimmy Dugan, like he's an alcoholic because his career didn't work out, but he's still stuck in this game and he's still an alcoholic and he's just trying to find a place. But I think he clearly has a lot of stuff going on that he never dealt with in regards to the end of his own career. And he's probably just taking that out on everybody else around him, outside of how he looks at gender and, who should be playing the game, who shouldn't, etc. So he's a character that has a lot going on. I liked that they didn't give him any kind of like romantic relationship with anybody.
They tried a little bit. I mean, there is some hints there, and I didn't like those little hints. I think like a friendship would have been a little bit better. But to be fair, Dottie is really beautiful, and her husband isn't in the picture. And I mean, he's hanging out a lot of time with her, so I didn't love it, but I get it.
Yeah, it's Gina Davis right after Thelma.
Yeah.
They're both adults. Like, there's nothing.
And she's also like the manager of the team
over
too.
The line, I do see it as a friendship, and I see it as a way that like you can explore both of their characters through their conversations, and also see like a different side of Jimmy. I like it, and maybe it's like if she wasn't married, maybe that something would have developed eventually. But like I feel like it just feels like a friendship where they do actually care about each other. But I'm just glad they didn't go into like a full blown romance with, because it would have been easy to do, right? And like stereotypical. So I was happy about that.
And then it would be less about the baseball if they did that as well. So I feel like that just, it's too tropey. That would have been really Hollywoody. And I mean, we still like, I can see what you're saying, because you get the Hans Zimmer soundtrack, and I love Hans Zimmer, but there are moments where you're like, yeah, this is 90s Hollywood. Yeah.
I'll say the one thing about Jimmy Dugan, like doing my research, like I was really fascinated with the story. I really was. And supposedly there's like a documentary on Netflix. I forget what it's called, but it's about like two of the women in this league falling in love. And like that's something that, this obviously 1992, it didn't dive into it all. I think they said like 2/3 of the people in this league were like gay. Super fascinating. They had to keep that under wraps, especially in the 40s. But
that's a huge part of the Amazon show.
Yeah. Like I said, everything I wanted in this was in that seems like, because there's segregation too. There's a reason why there's no black players, and that's really interesting to me as well. But from what I researched, I believe Jimmy Dugan or people like Jimmy Dugan were brought on not right away. They were brought on when there was low ratings and people weren't watching the sport. That's kind of switched in this. He's brought on like right at the beginning, it seems like. And then when, there aren't fans in the stands, they do that whole thing with Time Magazine and all that stuff. I didn't love that sequence. And let me tell you why. Is because at the beginning, these are ball players and the girls think of themselves as ball players. And there is that time where they're like, this is what you're going to wear, girls. And I don't know why I guess I expected the good of society to win out and for them not to have to wear that, but they did. They had to wear that. And I read that, if they didn't wear those outfits or those uniforms, this wouldn't have happened. Like that came with the package deal, right? But I think obviously it frustrated the women to be put, in that, because hold on, say it.
Femininity.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. Anyway, like being a proper lady was like a huge thing with this. And I think they probably had issue with that. But when the ratings were poor, there's these sequences where it's if you catch a foul ball, you get a kiss. I hated that. I wish we saw some blowback, as in they were frustrated. Like that's falling into that. They aren't ball players. They're girls, and we're going to use them and exploit them to get people in the stands, which is not why the league was created in the first place, but also it's what's unique about it. So you got to kind of use it at the same time. So I wish that we saw just a little bit of them not loving that aspect of how their league had become to get people in the stands. But we don't get that. And like you said, this is a really good, especially with the Hans Zimmer score. This feels like a sports movie. It's a good sports movie. Like you said, Rudy, Remember the Titans. It feels like that. Like I said, I think what holds this back for me, there's a lot more interesting elements here that could have been explored. I thought this could have gone so many places, but like I said, it just becomes too big, and then that's why you have an Amazon show. There's just so much you could have dived into.
It's funny that you would say that about the skirts. I'm a competitive fencer, so sport fencer. And I'm 39, and I had to fence in an outfit with a skirt because when I started fencing, it was still necessary for women to wear little skirts, and they fenced to less of a number. We would fence to 3 instead of 5. So like those aspects of the it is belittling, but you're just so darn happy to get to play it all because it wasn't even a sport that was allowed for a while. You're like, oh, damn. You take your scraps, but you don't consider it a seat at the table. And it would be more interesting to talk about that.
What type is foil or saber or epee, or what do you?
I do foil. Technically, I've done and coached all 3, but I specialize in foil. Good on you for knowing that.
Great. Dad, stop, Mr. That was impressive, but I hate you for it.
Just curious.
Yeah.
What kind of fencing? That was good. Well, speaking of fencing, that makes me think of the Olympics, and it made me think of like something I looked up while looking up stuff about this film. Is that Gina Davis really wasn't involved? She really wasn't involved with sports at all before this film. But then this really got her into it, and they're like, "Wow, you're like really good at this." And I guess she tried out, or she was in the archery for the Olympics.
She almost made the team, but
archery.
Yeah, and for this movie, she was brought on to replace Deborah Winger very last minute. The entire team had been training professionally, and they're like, Gina, can you catch up? Not only did she catch up, she was better than everybody very quickly. Like, the casting of her for Dottie is very accurate to this, like, feeling of someone for whom the sport came well but easily. And as someone who's coached a lot of fencers and been around a lot of fencers, this is something that I see. When people are too good at it too fast, they kind of just throw it away. They're more interested in like how everyone else is feeling. But then when people are like Kit, where they're way too excited, that they get themselves beyond the optimal arousal point in sports, and they can't compete. So you have this like dichotomy of neither of them being very good for being a successful career sports person.
Well,
it's funny that you mentioned Deborah Winger too, because we haven't talked about it yet, but you know why she dropped out of the movie?
No.
It's because Madonna was in it.
Ah!
Yep. Deborah Winger was cast as Dottie before Gina Davis. Deborah accused Penny, the director, of making an Elvis film and withdrew from the movie despite spending 3 months training with the Chicago Cubs. Yep. They did not like that Madonna was in this movie. She did not like. Supposedly the only one that was like kind of chill with it was Rosie O'Donnell. Like she would just, because everyone was like really shy around Madonna. Like they didn't know if like to approach her and just be like, hi, what's up? Even, the director. And I guess Rosie O'Donnell would just like come to set like playing her music. And I think they were called Ro and Mo is what I read. The two of them together. So yeah, that's why she dropped out though. She was really good in this. She's really solid in this. I really loved her.
Really solid.
Yeah.
And she's really playing everything. I so appreciate that everyone is actually playing the sport, and there's a real like authenticity that makes it feel full and lived in and real. And at the end, when everyone is actual women from the league and they bring in so another reason I chose this film is because I feel like it contrasts here very well. Because when I talk about a Hollywood movie that wants to span time and have a sort of schmaltz factor to it, and yet, like, I wanted to say, like, here's an example of Tom Hanks in a schmaltzy film that works, because I don't feel like here works. We'll get into it later, but, like, why,
Yeah, that sequence made me really sad, though, because they're like, yeah, they're dead. Yeah, they're dead. Yeah, he's dead. It's like, dang, it's really, I mean, that's how it works, but I was like, dang, geez.
Yeah.
Emotional.
Yeah. Time. Rosie O'Donnell actually got way more time on set because she was one of the few people who could understand Penny Marshall's thick Bronx accent. And so they're like, just put her in more scenes. She's fantastic.
Yeah, she was very funny. And like, I think you mentioned authenticity. Like, I think that's how I define this movie. Just feels authentic. And like, people, they were not using stunt doubles really. There were a lot of injuries. That one bruise was real. And she said that was there for a year on her leg, which if you've ever had a bruise on your, like, you understand that's how it goes. But, it just, it feels like everyone was so invested in making it. And like, that just makes me like a movie so much more. Like I think especially now it's like so often not the case. And maybe people were getting concussions and like some crazy, like maybe it wasn't the safest at all times, but like if they wanted to do it and they were having a good time, it's interesting. And they were like, he was having them just play like games against each other as well, like unscripted, just play, and like it's just a lot of fun to me. And I love the game, so I think it's easy to like. One thing I wanted to talk about quickly. How do you guys feel about Kit in general as a character? Because I think when you really think about what the story is doing, and then with the way it ends, I think it's more so about Dottie's maturity and than anything. Like, I almost don't want to see Kit win. Like, she's very selfish, I think, to an extent. And like, I think just kind of sulks because her sister is better and just gets more attention, but that's earned. Like it's a strange dynamic. I wanted to see what you guys think about it.
I mean, I just think she's immature, especially with you're playing a professional sport. And that's part of sports, is that if you're not doing well, you get taken out of the game. And her sister, the entire season, it seems like, has been a fill-in manager. And when she's like, it's time for you maybe to get removed, your arm's not doing well anymore, she just, complains about it, throws a fit, for lack of a better term. And I really don't like how the whole ending is set up, to be honest. I'm sorry I have so much issues with this film, but I
It's
also feel
okay.
like I feel like there's no nostalgia there, which I feel like both of you guys obviously have seen this film before, and I'm not a huge lover of the game. I like baseball, but I'm not
Yeah.
like we watched long time ago. We watched Field of Dreams, and that was another one that I didn't have a lot of nostalgia for. And Connor and Dan were talking about like how much history of the game is actually in it. That would mean so much more to me. But I hate that you really don't see Kit until it's kind of like just assumed that she is going to be in that team at the very end that they compete against, and she is, even though there's other teams in the league. I just
They
have to
talked
say this.
about her getting traded there.
Yeah, but then I guess it just works out that that was the team that they played. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, oh, she's gone, and then she's there at the end.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just
the team they played in real life, I think, in the championship that year.
right. So that makes sense. I will say, just while we're talking about the ending and Kit, I just wanted to say this real quick because I feel like this is perfect time. I don't like how Dottie leaves the team because I was very much paying attention to why. Like I said, I was paying attention to that and her husband. I wanted to see that, but that was the moment of the movie where I was locked in the most, and I wanted to see why she did it. And she explains why she did it, why she came back. It wasn't for the sport; it was for the girls. But then you never see her talk to the girls when she leaves. You never see her talk to the girls when she gets back. She's telling us that is why she came back. She's telling us that's why she was so emotional that she left. We don't see that though. And I was really missing out. I hate also, sure, I didn't need to see her husband. I 100% did not want this to fall into a love story. Like I said, I didn't hate it, but I didn't love the whole Tom Hanks getting feelings for her kind of thing. But I hate that she just shows up and it's just like, oh, she's there. She's come to save the day. And I do like that they don't win in the end, but that seems so shoehorned in to me. Like I feel like show me her talking to the girls. Like we don't even get to see that. But like I said, I think it's because the story is so big that the runtime's already pretty long. I mean, this is over 2 hours long, I think. So maybe she talks to the girls in the Amazon show. I don't know. But what did you think about Kitty?
I think Kit is a complicated character. I definitely like her based on like Unfair Stuff, which is this is Lori Petty coming right off of Point Break, and I love Lori Petty, and she is in her pettiest. But like, I'm not sure you can totally like that character, but I also can super relate to wanting to be really good at something and then seeing someone for whom it just comes so easy, throw it away, and how angry that made me to know that someone would do that. And that's a little bit of I think what Kit's character is experiencing. And in a 2-hour movie, like it becomes a little difficult to still do your montages and your passage of time, and then also have nuanced looks at these women. It's really just hard to get this much screen time for all these women, period.
Yeah, and I still feel like with the amount of time, like each woman like does feel at least somewhat fleshed out, and like I feel like you kind of understand them and like their role on the team and like their dynamics, and you really enjoy spending time with this team and this particular group. But yeah, I do hear what you're saying, and I think it's a very classic younger sibling dynamic where, like I said, I think it more so reflects on Dottie's maturity and ability to handle the situation properly and like look out for her sister, even when she's maybe not acting in a way that's mature or that the audience can fully get behind. It's just that level of understanding of, we're still family. It's okay. It's just a game. I can look past this and be bigger. So I like that in the end.
Yeah, I mean, people love this movie. As far as a sports movie is concerned, it made more in the box office than Bull Durham and Field of Dreams combined. I love both of those films. I really love Bull Durham particularly. But like, this still is a woman-centric film that is still very sportsy, and it's hard to like focus in on any one of the individual characters like you could in an episodic television show without it getting accused of not being enough about the baseball, I feel. And I like that it is still focused in on that. A question I have for the two of you guys is, do you feel like Dottie dropped the ball on purpose?
I didn't know that was a conversation that people had, to be honest. I thought she just hit her really hard. I guess both of you guys have kind of brought that up, so I didn't know that was like a big talking point of this film.
Yeah.
Penny Marshall refused to ever make a statement on it. She said she didn't want to tell anybody. She took it to the grave.
I would say no with my gut reaction, but I wouldn't be surprised if the answer was yes. How do you feel?
I would say just a question that we brought up that's kind of like that in a previous episode is there's also this question of whiplash of who stole the folder, like what happened with the folder. And I think that if there's any hidden meaning, maybe this would be too obvious, but if she did drop the ball on purpose, I think in the filmmaking style, there would be something that shows that, similar as into Whiplash. I don't think that there's anything in it that shows us that, he's the one who misplaced the folder or whatever, something like that. And I don't think there's anything here as well like that gives me any reason to believe that I shouldn't take in reality what the film is showing me.
Yeah. I mean, there are several times where Dottie shows that she will put on a show to make the sport. Like, she knows the league might end. She knows that she wants to send this off to the girls in the best possible way. And, she'll do the catch. The catch behind her back, Gina Davis actually did that because the stunt double couldn't. Like, fuck you, Gina. So she's keen to put on a show, and she's keen to help her sister, but also, like, she has a morality and she doesn't want to dilute the game. So I don't think Dottie the character would drop it, but I do feel like sometimes in the film they want to say, like, maybe Dottie the character would drop it.
I have to say, Kit blowing that stop sign at third base is so egregious. Like, it's a terrible decision. I was like, she's out by like 20 feet, but she was locked in, just went for it. So
yes, yeah. Whenever I watch this with big sports fans, big baseball fans, they always go, "What the hell?" right there.
Yeah, it was a crazy move, but I guess it paid off.
It was good though.
Do you guys have any closing thoughts on the movie?
No, I think that it's just it's been inducted into the U.S. Registry of Film for preservation. It's got the line, "There's no crying in baseball," which is the 54th most quoted line of all film time. Like, it's amazing that you hadn't seen it, and I'm so hyped that you finally got to. Like, awesome. This is quintessential American cinema, and it's got our boy Tom Hanks, our piece of American pie, in it.
Yeah. I want to play baseball. That's what I'll say. I played little league. I know there's like grown-up leagues. I just moved to my area, so I feel like I'm 4 years old, but I want to find a grown-up league.
There are 30+ leagues where I live, so it's not unheard of. You could absolutely do that.
Yeah, that's it. It looks fun. Baseball looks like a sport you could play when you're like older. So yeah, that's it. I just want to play baseball. I won't cry, but I will play baseball.
Just as long as you're not the catcher, because your knees will go fast. I used to catch, and I can't.
Oh, my dad did too. My dad did too.
Yeah.
Any Grant or Dan? Any closing thoughts? Do you play baseball?
Baseball? Yes, I did. Baseball.
I know you messed up your ankle.
Baseball was my worst sport, but I loved it. In terms of, I mean, not to go off on a whole tangent. I think baseball right now is the best professional sport basically to watch. I think the NFL, sports betting's worming its way into football, has, like, I think destroyed it. I think, again, this is a long tangent, but like, I think games are not being played on the up and up right now. I think you see that over and over and over again. FanDuel should not be a partner of the NFL. I don't know what's going on, but that's the deal with football. Basketball is like, it's all isolation, and just like the style of play is just tough to watch. Nobody care. I care about hockey, but nobody else does. I just think baseball is the best, and I think there's a lot of parity. Kind of anything can happen. I just think it's a great sport, but it was my worst sport in terms of playing. I was not a good baseball player, but still
fencing.
I did fence when I was young. That's why.
Oh my
I don't
gosh.
just like have that. I did fence when I was young. But
Nice.
hockey was my sport.
Did you
And
fence in
basketball.
school, or did you fence? Like, it's such a small industry. I probably know who you fenced with.
No, my dad had when he was younger, and he just like taught us at home, and we had foils and masks. We would just like mess around, but it was fun. I
Fantastic.
don't remember the name of the school we went to, but it was in Southeast Pennsylvania. It was a good time.
Nice.
I can say this because I know my mom doesn't listen to this podcast, but I remember growing up, she was like, Stone, if there's one sport, like your mind, I think your physical, skill, like you'd be really good at. And I was like, yeah. She's like, I think it would be Olympic curling. And I was like, okay. And for years, she'd be like, what do you think about that curling thing still? And I'm like, you know what? I'll circle back to it. Who knows? I could have been an Olympic
Curling
curler.
is so cool. I love curling. I think it's awesome.
It's so random.
It was very random. I was not expecting that. Did we watch curling often in my family? No, but whatever. Dan, being from Philadelphia, do you want to kind of summarize what our next movie is about?
Yeah. Philadelphia was 1993. Is that right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 1993. Starring Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. I think this is. I'm like 95% sure this was the last time Denzel wasn't the lead in a movie, which is absolutely insane, or at least billed as the lead. But
Gladiator 2. Gladiator 2.
Oh.
Yeah, I guess that would count. And sadly, I think Denzel is really close to retiring, which is a shame, but he's talked about that recently. But basically, Tom Hanks plays a lawyer at a big firm in the city. He's one of their best lawyers, seemingly. Unbeknownst to them, maybe he is a gay man who contracts AIDS, and he starts kind of suffering from that, and his health starts deteriorating. He's managing a huge case for them. A case file gets misplaced while he's getting some treatment, allegedly, and he is then fired really quickly. He files a wrongful firing suit against his firm, and Denzel Washington is a bit of a kind of sleazy defense lawyer who maybe kind of knows his way around the system. He's gone against Hanks at times, but he ends up taking on his case. And he's also like very homophobic and kind of a dickhead in general. And it's just kind of about how this trial progresses and kind of just dealing with the social impact of the entire situation. This movie has a lot going on, and also very much, it's very intertwined with the city itself, and that, the opening montage is amazing. I love the music for this as well. It's a great movie. And I was reading Letterboxd reviews of this. This is a movie I feel like people really just get wrong, to be blunt, a lot of the time in their criticisms. And, we'll get into that. But I think this movie, for being made when it was made, is just so effective and important. So, KT, do you want to kind of lead off with your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when I watched this, the first thought I had is, does this hold up for a modern audience who don't know how controversial this movie is conceptually? Just even having Tom Hanks agree to be in this role, because we were originally thinking it was going to be Daniel Day-Lewis, who I adore and who would give a phenomenal performance, but he was also in My Beautiful Laundrette. Like, he'd already established a willingness to play a gay character and to have that kind of like artsy European viewpoint. So by taking America's sweetheart and putting him in this role and having him represent that, it made everybody feel like they knew somebody who had AIDS, which was so important at the time period. Like, I grew up having PSAs in my elementary school where they would bring someone in with AIDS to tell us, like, it's not transmitted by hugging. You can touch them. You can be in the same room as them. Like, it really, really needed to get out there as a message because there was so much misinformation and there was no way for people to feel safe about telling each other what was actually going on. I also don't know if the modern audience would know that obviously the main character is going to die at the end, like, because people live with this all the time now. So I wonder how this holds up because it is a really hugely influential and important film at the time in which it comes out.
I mean, I can be y'all's guinea pig. This is another movie I hadn't seen before. And I told Dan, I didn't. I remembered what this was about, like, as it was happening. I didn't when I clicked on it, I didn't know it was about, AIDS or anything like that. I honestly didn't even know if I knew. I knew it was about a gay man in some instance when I was watching it. I didn't know how it was going to unfold though. I just thought from the poster, it's like, it's a courtroom drama. Sweet. there's a gavel on it. This will be fun. 2 lawyers. And then as the film goes on, it was kind of educational to me. I'm not a big history guy. I mean, I love being on this podcast with Dan and how much he teaches me as we have been doing these episodes together, and Connor too, when it comes to the military and everything like that. I grew up in a very sheltered Christian environment. There was nobody came into our school to talk about AIDS. I didn't know that was, sheltered from me, but not really. I lived in a very small town in Michigan as well. So that really necessarily wasn't a huge problem, unlike a city like Philadelphia, So it was really educational to me, and really fascinating to see kind of how far we've come. Like, this had me looking up questions about AIDS now, kind of a thing. And I mean, I can only imagine this coming out in 1993 and being, nominated for so many awards and having so much recognition. And like you said, having Tom Hanks in it was such a big deal. And I think, yes, putting him in it over Daniel Day-Lewis, I think worked out beautifully. Like you said, he was the 90s golden boy. And just seeing him in a film like this just makes you appreciate him so much more. And also, good Lord, this has got to be his best performance. It really does. Obviously he won an Oscar for this, very much deserved. And I feel kind of, when it comes to Oscars, I think it's just like kind of a role really helps a person in winning one, because I was like, this is such what happens to his character throughout this film is like, this is such an Oscar role. Like, this is like what you kind of want. A character with this much substance that has this much physicality to him, but he does a really amazing job. And I thought Denzel was going to have more of a front seat to this story, but it is more about Tom Hanks. But I did see people, Dan talked about Letterboxd criticisms, talking about how this might have been too much about Denzel and his character and not more from the perspective of this gay man. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, Dan, when you talking about people misunderstood the story.
Yeah, I'm talking about a lot of things. I think one and again, I want to talk about this without I'm not trying to bash anybody, but people are like, oh, just another straight story about a gay,
yes.
This was, the director made this because of his friend who had AIDS. That's one of the inspirations. This also is based on a true story. This happened, and then this happened again in Philadelphia a year after the movie, with someone that had HIV. But before that, there was an actual case just like this that actually inspired it. But a lot of people that had AIDS were used as extras, and one particular actor, I think TriStar told him basically to fire. They didn't want to insure him because I think he had HIV. And the director, is it Jonathan Demme? Is that right?
Yeah, the same way we did Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, he basically said, no, we're keeping him. And they literally worked their shooting schedule around him being in the hospital. And it feels like a movie made with a lot of empathy. And people also say oh, this movie has a lot of there's homophobic jokes and stuff. It's I'm sorry, if you watch this movie and you think any joke here is played for laughs, you're not watching the movie properly. Like straight up, that's objectively wrong. Like Denzel Washington in this movie he's not a character you're rooting for or are supposed to like. He's a character to help display the public's treatment of this person, but also show, the justice system, its functionality. And even though he doesn't agree with the lifestyle, he still is going to do his job, and he still is going to be an effective lawyer. And I think the pairing of him with another lawyer is really interesting because they both understand the ins and outs of everything on a professional level, but at a personal level, there's this like disconnect between them that they're trying to bridge throughout the course of the movie. And I feel like there's so many moments where you see Denzel starting to like maybe feel something for him or, have empathy or compassion. And it's almost like he stops himself over and over and over and over. And you literally see it in his brain go like, no, I can't feel what I'm feeling or whatever. And this movie is so good to me. And I think to just brush it aside as like, oh, it's a straight story about that's so lazy. This is 1993 as well. There were no movies about homophobia. There were no movies about AIDS. Like, I don't think people understand how big a deal this was. And they see it get brushed aside is just frustrating to me.
When you're talking about I would say Denzel's character just like shutting it down. I just wanted to say, watching this for the first time, that sequence with Tom Hanks and the opera music is one of the coolest sequences I've ever seen. That is incredible, with like the lighting and just the way Denzel is staring into the camera, and then the way the camera is like in an upward angle towards Hanks's face, and just watching him get lost in that. That was insane. I was watching this at 2 a.m. last night, and I was just mesmerized. I was like, this is. Anyways, I just wanted to say that real quick while you're talking about that. Go ahead, Katie.
Oh yeah, no, that scene. Yeah, I could talk about that scene ad infinitum. I'll tag it at the end of this thought, though. Like, I think, and this is not to jump ahead to what I know Dan is going to talk about when we talk about Saving Private Ryan, because I saw in your TikTok you mentioned this, and I agree a lot. People struggle with main characters that are there to represent a version of the viewer that they might not like to see. Because when this came out, there were a lot of people who acted and spoke and were the way that Denzel Washington was. And you're supposed to see that, and you're supposed to recognize it. And maybe you recognize it in yourself. And that is difficult to hear and be like, oh God, this character, how could this character be our likable second character? Because it represents a more realistic version of what was happening at the time. It just makes a lot more sense to me.
It's interesting, Dan, that you mentioned that people sometimes maybe find this funny, or something that Denzel does funny, which obviously it shouldn't be that way. I did see, though, that originally he wasn't the person they had in mind for this role. They had either Robin Williams or Billy Crystal, because they wanted because the movie was so serious. They wanted someone who is known for a comedic element to like be in the trailers. That way it would make maybe more people watch the film. And I do not think this would have worked if either of them were.
Yeah.
It would not have been good, especially with just him being a black man. It just that simple choice. Maybe you have felt the same thing as this person that you're, representing.
I agree. I think him being a black man and having some type of understanding of discrimination, it gives him at least some level that he can connect with Tom Hanks on, outside of just being a lawyer. There's some type of baseline understanding, or at least a place for like empathy to come from, at least in a legal sense, when he's making his argument that he can base it off of. I also wanted to say Mary Steenburgen, she plays Connie, the lawyer who is representing the firm.
Yeah.
She is so good in this, and she's awful. But as a lawyer, she's really effective in what she does. And there are some moments, especially the final questioning that she does, it's like she's like pulling his skin off. Like she's just like literally taking every single aspect of his life. Very similar to, I mean, not really, but Anatomy of a Fall was the same thing where like you're just picking someone apart so heavily. But in this case, it's, not about, it's not just about an investigation. It's about like literally who you are and your life and your decisions and, it coming out that he had cheated on his partner. It's so tough. And like his honesty there is really impressive, but also just like heartbreaking. And then basically that's the end of his life. And just, I feel like that moment is such a good representation of just having who you are just be analyzed and scrutinized and like demonized in this way. But she's amazing in this movie. Like it's maybe the third best performance. I'm trying to think, but I thought she was excellent.
And she struggled with this role as well. Like there's the trivia about how like she said she hated this, and they use it in the film. Like this was a hard character to want to play and portray at all. I can imagine it's almost a Joffrey level of like, wow, this person's really shitty. Look at what you have to, the heights you have to aspire to. To go back to the, like, if it wasn't Denzel, this movie's called Philadelphia. There's a disingenuousness of not including a black character to some degree. Like if it was Robin Williams, I would feel pretty pissed off. I did also read that Antonio Banderas was not the original choice. It was John Leguizamo, but he turned it down to do Super Mario Brothers.
Jeez. I was gonna say, like, honestly, this is not at all what the subject matter of the story is at all about. Antonio Banderas looks really good in this film. I completely understand.
Hard agree, but that was an upgrade. Yeah. I like
yes.
Upgrade.
100%.
I also just think I really like what he's doing as well. Like it's such a he brings a lot of heart to it, even though it's not, it's definitely not the focal point of the movie. Like he just really feels like a rock for Andrew, and like just a very supportive and like kind person. I like what he's doing. I think it was a good casting.
I think Leguizamo is another choice for like a comedian. It did seem like they were really afraid people would not want to watch a sad movie.
Yeah. Another thing I was talking to Stone about this, Katie, before you came on. They didn't market this as a movie about AIDS. It wasn't. I don't think it was even in at least most of the trailers. It was just like a courtroom drama because they were afraid people wouldn't go watch it. And another thing, it's interesting to hear Tom Hanks talk about the movie. He basically said, I wouldn't do this now. It should be being played by a gay man, like a gay actor. But he also said, and again, this is like the critiques. It was 1993. He is Tom Hanks. Him taking this role was an amazing thing because people go see the fucking movie. Like, it's just, it seems simple, but like people just, I don't understand the criticism. But he wanted to make the movie because he felt like it was important and you need to get people in the seats. So him being in the movie and it being a little flightier about what it was about is, I think, one of the reasons it was seen. And this was successful at the box office. So I think this movie's really important. Yeah.
And just when you have something about the subject matter, I mean, every like decision counts. Like I was reading up that something that people get frustrated with about is that Denzel Washington and his wife in the movie, they kiss multiple times, but you never get to see that between Tom Hanks and Antonio Banderas. And I was reading that there was a bedroom scene between Hanks and Banderas. And the only reason why it was cut out, people found out about it, were frustrated. Like how, obviously you're not going to show it, right? Because it's two men. But the reason why it was edited out is they just thought timing wise, the movie was already too long and it didn't necessarily need that. That's a simple decision like that. And they say, in retrospect, we would have gladly ignored or avoided all that controversy and kept that scene in if we knew we were going to get yelled at about it for 25 years, what we have done. It's just like, it was just a simple movie making decision. Like you said, I love that we don't get to see, just thinking about Antonio Banderas and how his role is in this. I like you said, Dan, I think I just love that he's kind of just like a constant. Like, that's just, he doesn't need that much. He just loves his partner. That's all you really need to his character. And I feel like maybe you could have added some conversation between him and Hanks. Probably not, because his character was so sick about him cheating on him. But it's just like, it's understood that he loves him so much, and that's obvious that's not who he is anymore, that you don't need that. That's not needed.
Yeah, I'm glad there wasn't, honestly. Like,
yes,
because it's not about that. And that's another thing where you know, talking about something physical between Hanks and Banderas, like, that wouldn't be bad, but the movie's not this is not a romance. This is a story about Andrew Miller's sickness and trial and death. That is the tone of this is very heavy, and it's not so again, I don't think that would have been a bad thing, but it's not the focus of the movie.
I think the focus of the movie is what Denzel says in the courtroom. He's like, let's talk about what this is really about. This is how society views AIDS. That's why this isn't told from Tom Hanks' perspective.
And just gay people in general.
Exactly. This is what this is about. So this is what we're like gonna talk about, kind of a thing.
Yeah. I think this is one of Denzel's best performances in his life. And you know, I'd have to look at it on paper, but maybe top 5, like I don't know, maybe top 3. Like, he's just so good in this, and sharp as a lawyer, like, believable. And so is Andrew. And like, the two of them bouncing off each other as lawyers is really entertaining to watch. Yeah,
I think Tom Hanks is a very, very interesting actor to look at, because he doesn't, I mean, with the exception of the other film we're going to look at, Road of Perdition, he doesn't often do a movie alone. Even if he's the lead, there's someone like Denzel who's playing off on an auxiliary character, or he's in an ensemble like A League of Their Own. Like, he has a capacity to be his own actor and also really lift with other actors. So, like, this is a great performance out of Denzel in a lesser role because he has Hanks to play off of. I think it's a great choice for looking at Tom Hanks.
And Casey, you may have said this, I had to step away for a second, but the movie itself literally is like a PSA about AIDS. Like, it's like explaining to the audience, now you can hug someone. Like, it's literally like having to explain this, which, you know, it's a shame that was needed, but that's also why it's so important. Like, it's coming at a time where, like, this was such a huge deal, like I said, and I just I really just think this works, and it is very sad. It is hard to watch. But again, I think, like you said, you kind of, you know, he's not going to survive, you know, from the beginning, really. So it's still just not easy to watch.
Yeah, I grew up in New York City. So yes, the New York City public schools in the mid 90s that were doing these, like, bringing people in so that you could see it and you could hear it, you could interact with it. But without the internet, this was as close as most people were going to get to this information. And so I really think that it's important that it was Tom Hanks. There weren't too many, if any, out gay actors. Like, I guess Rupert Everett, you could have had it be, but otherwise, in order to get Americans to get this in their, you know, blockbuster when it comes out, you needed this casting.
Yeah, I agree. And quickly, maybe we should probably move into Saving Private Ryan, but if anyone wants to look into the case that inspired this, the guy's name was Jeffrey Bowers, and it was one of the first HIV/AIDS discrimination cases ever that went to an actual public hearing, and that was in Boston. He was a Massachusetts guy in 1987, and this was the case that really kind of inspired. He was working at a law firm, got wrongfully terminated, so Jeffrey Bowers was his name.
Not to dampen that story at all, but I did read that they said that he was inspiration, but didn't give him any recognition in the actual movie credits. So they sued the filmmakers and they got $500,000 off it. So good for them.
Good.
Good for them.
Yeah.
They both won too. So they all, not only won from their cases that went to trial, but they also won from the case from the movie that went to trial.
That's such a great. Gonna get sued by somebody who fucking knows how to sue, son.
Oh Lord. But yeah, I enjoyed this movie a lot. I watched Saving Private Ryan with my wife last night. We're both night shift workers, so we're used to staying up late. But even yesterday, we drove like 6 hours, and I wish she would have been able to watch this movie with me as well, because I know she would have loved it. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like I said, didn't know necessarily what all was going to happen. Didn't know and realize, because I haven't been educated on AIDS that much, because it's not really prevalent in our society anymore, which is a good thing. You know, is that he was going to die at the end. So that was just it was a really good watch, really solid watch that I really enjoyed. Also, courtroom dramas are just great.
I think it's definitely prevalent. It's just like more treatable now. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I also think it's a great example of special effects makeup. I mean, this got a nomination. It didn't win. It lost to Ed Wood, which I feel like I have a hard disagree with, particularly in that scene that you were describing earlier, Stone, where you're like the lighting and the describing the opera. We're getting a top angle on the special effects makeup. At this point, he's pretty gaunt. He did lose 30 pounds, but like a lot of this is the color and pallor of his skin. And it is a very flawless thing. And it's a very important thing to get this accurate, because we're sending this out as a PSA so that people know what this really looks and feels and sounds like. And like, damn, that was some good special effects makeup, in my opinion.
And something that's, I'm sorry to go back, but one more tying thing that ties the last two movies together. Tom Hanks gained like 40 pounds for A League of Their Own. He was just eating like ice cream and shit. And then a year later, he did Philadelphia. So honestly, looking at him, he lost more than like 30 pounds would get him back to baseline. But like, I think he lost even more than that, because he gets really gaunt by the end of this. And that's gaining and losing over 100 pounds in a year is crazy. Like it's really bad for your body, but it makes it more impressive. And the dedication to A League of Their Own just to be like a heavy baseball guy is kind of funny too. But
I said I'm glad for like Saving Private Ryan. It seems like he was his fine weight. Like he didn't have to do anything, because he's just supposed to be a normal dude. He's just supposed to be an English teacher. Didn't have to get jacked. Nothing like that. It was World War II. It was just normal people going to war.
Wait, so this was your first time watching this?
No, which one?
Saving Private Ryan.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the one movie that I had seen, which is why I just hadn't watched it in a long time. My brother is still into really World War II a whole lot, so he had like tons of these films on DVD growing up, and that I would watch it with him. And this is one of his favorite movies ever, which is why it resonates a lot with me, is because I did watch it a lot growing up. And I read like this is the first collaboration, which is kind of wild, that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg had. Because just speaking of like the media that my brother had, like he had Band of Brothers and The Pacific, and those were both produced both by Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks. And I was just sitting on the couch watching this with my wife yesterday, and I know that this is inspired kind of by a true story, but it's also made up as well. And I was just thinking about it as in, this is such a good idea for a film. It really is about World War II, and the fact that I love the title of this movie. It doesn't have the word World War II in it at all. I know that's such a little thing that people really don't talk about a whole lot, but I think it's a perfect name for this film. The whole cast is just incredibly stacked. I guess I read somewhere that Andrew Scott is randomly in the background kind of in this film, which is crazy that he was like almost nominated for an Oscar, should have been nominated for an Oscar last year. But yeah, this is just, I mean, everyone kind of knows what the story is about, but it's just about this group of men, like 8 or 9 of them, who gets assigned a special mission to go rescue James Francis Ryan, because 3 of his brothers have died in the war. And I think there is actually a name for what they're doing. I think that this was actually a rule that they had in World War II. I can't remember what it was called, but yeah, they're trying to rescue him and bring him back home. I saw some complaints that I think are interesting, where people think this is kind of filmed like an action film. I don't see that personally. I don't think anything that's going on is cool. It's crazy to me. Like there were some sequences where I couldn't believe what was going on, but everything about this is just, it's not anti-war, it's not pro-war, it's just devastation. It's just stakes and determination and just you really, just got to believe, I guess, in what you're doing and just how the war changes you. Obviously, we talked about it before we jumped on, and Dan just made a video about it. But Upham is such an important character. He really is. Everyone hates him, but just how much the war can change somebody, because it's such an important detail that he is in this movie and has never experienced it before. And you have this man who still has his humanity intact, competing with people who no longer have it anymore. And I think Tom Hanks is like Captain Miller is that in between. Like he sees where Upham's coming from, but then he also is on the side of I've seen shit. And by the end of the film, I don't know. I'm really rambling right now. There's a lot to take in with this movie. I mean, it's a long film. There's a lot that goes on, but it's one of my favorites, to be honest.
KT, what's kind of your general take about this, or what stands out to you?
Oh yeah, this is one of the first like war movies I can remember seeing, younger and being like, oh, okay, this isn't just it doesn't feel like a propaganda film. And I know that like it's very easy to want to say like Americans want to relive the Second World War, the greatest war, where we were super awesome. But I think you're not watching this movie. I think that maybe those are the people who think this is actiony. And this and Band of Brothers were one of the first times I felt like, oh, this is quite possibly a good, accurate representation of what this might feel like, because I would get so attached to certain characters, and then an action scene or a war scene would happen, and it would be very difficult to tell, like, oh my God, is my favorite character still alive? Who just got shot? Everyone's wearing the same uniform. It's so chaotic. And like, that's to give you this fear that was like to be in this war versus like, hey, ain't that cool? Like, it shouldn't be cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually just was doing some research on this. There's kind of science behind action movies and war movies in general in regards to what type of response it creates in your body. And look, what these type of movies generally do is it creates a release of adrenaline, which when that is happening, you really can't classify something as an anti-war film, because the reaction you're getting in regards to your brain chemistry, like, it's an enjoyable experience because you're releasing adrenaline because of what you're seeing. So I think in reality, there aren't very many anti-war films. But I think when you look at what makes movies just kind of like war propaganda or something more real like this, it's seeing all of the other layers of it. So seeing like the psychological damage to the soldiers, seeing civilians suffering is another huge part of it. Like seeing the effect that the war has on the people that are just there. You see that with the French in certain areas. The scene with the family trying to let their child down, where Vin Diesel gets shot. Capazzo, is that his name? You see this whole movie is just kind of moral dilemma after moral dilemma. Like, it's a sequence of set pieces that allow you to look at the morality of the war and look at these guys and understand the dynamics and just see how there were so many no-win scenarios, and it's literally just no-win scenario after no-win scenario. And I will say, I think that final sequence in Rommel is kind of cool. Like, it's a crazy sequence. Like, when he's going to flank the 20 millimeter and the tank is coming over the rubble at him, and he has to, like, I was like, holy shit, like, this is wild. And it is a really, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, like, when I say like cool, I mean like cool as in I wish I was there right now.
Yeah.
Kind of cool,
exactly.
versus like this is what it might feel like. So do you really? So I like zombie movies, and so many times people are like, I would do X in a zombie movie, and I'm like, you wouldn't do shit. You don't even run well.
Yeah.
So like, what would you really do? You might just cower on the stairs.
Yeah. But I think this movie is really perfect. And this cast is ridiculous. Even what's his face? Paul Giamatti.
Oh, Giovanni.
He's
Dude,
so
I
funny popping up in
I
this.
couldn't remember if he died or not, and I probably said the phrase Paul Giamatti 15 times while we were watching it. I was like, Leah, I cannot remember if he lives or not, and he's like, "Ow, my ankles." And I was like, I don't think he dies. I do not think he dies. He doesn't though.
They leave him. He gets left behind.
Yes, good.
But yeah, he's funny in this. I think Tom Sizemore. I really like what he's doing. And as a sergeant, he's kind of the buffer between Miller and the enlisted men, and it's such a tough role because, especially in the sequence at the radio tower with the machine gun nest, you see them really starting to come apart and then being like, what are we doing? Like, why are we here? I think they all have their doubts about the mission itself, but that sequence where it starts to boil over, and Sizemore, his character's Horvath, he has to, he ends up pulling his gun, but he is the buffer between them. And I think it's so interesting to see, and he's so believable, and I just really like what he's doing here. And it sucks that he dies, but I like his performance a lot.
When we're talking about this, when you guys were mentioning like it's hard that adrenaline, like you were talking about, Dan, to say like it's hard to be an anti-war film when you get that pump in you. And I think there's one sequence in this that shows us that that's not what Spielberg is trying to do, and it is with that machine gun nest. And why is that? Because you do not see anything. I feel like any other war film, any action scene, you show that. Like you want to impress the audience with your skill. And obviously he has that when it comes to, the start of the movie or the end of the movie. That would have been something really easy that you could have shown, but he wanted to show it from Upham's perspective. And I mean, there is that sequence with them walking in the dark and you see those explosions in the background. And I feel like that's a lot of what maybe guys saw during the wartime, was just what Upham sees. As you hear all of this noise, you see all of this action, and then you just unfortunately see the aftermath. And what a crazy decision to show all that and know that someone has got shot, but not know who it is.
Yeah.
And the fact that it is the medic, and I know, Giovanni Ribisi, I know you don't love him for good reasons, Dan, but that's such a horrifying sequence. It's and the fact that it is a medic, and I can only imagine how many times that happened during the war, is your medic dies and you're trying to ask them how to help them as they're dying. What a insane thing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's almost doing like a rundown in his own head of like what is going on, or like
he's like, flip me over.
Organs. He's like, in my liver, like, and telling him to put his legs up. And it's interesting because in that scene, I think Wade is the character maybe with the most humanity outside of Upham. But like you said,
100%.
Watching it through a scope and having no idea what's happening, while also understanding that it was just unnecessary in the first place. And I feel like what you see with that sequence is, I think it's a huge mistake. I think you see Miller like kind of having a breakdown and then just going into autopilot and being like, we're going to do this because I say so and because this is what we should do. But I think it's him at his most like unhinged, and everything is kind of falling apart, and then he makes a decision that gets someone killed. I think I find it a little odd, and I don't have a lot of critiques of this, but that moment happens, and then he kind of just goes into a monologue about where he's from and all. And I was kind of like, given how he was before this, and then he also gets someone killed, and then everyone's falling apart, this feels a little strange. But I don't know.
Who's saying where he's from? Are you talking about Tom Hanks' character?
Miller. It's when he actually, after that is when he actually says his backstory.
I'm a teacher. Yeah.
It kind of brings them together. But I don't know. Maybe it's just him having a moment of like self, like grace, almost like understanding I am a teacher. Like I'm just trying to make the right decisions here. Like, I'm doing my best. He's not perfect. He's just a guy. And maybe it makes sense in that context. But it's a little bit jarring. I also just wanted to say the character in this movie that's closest to this being a bit gung-ho is Barry Peppers Jackson, the sniper. He is pretty cool.
Dear Heavenly Father, please help my rifle.
He's also a very interesting character because I think of all of them, he is the most kind of sociopathic in terms of I think he really enjoys his work. But he's also the one that's religious. And I think it makes for an interesting character, but at the same time, in regards to him enjoying his work, I think as their sniper, he's very much in charge of their lives and protecting his friends. And I think from a religious perspective, he probably sees his cause as a just one. And then he's also, again, in charge of taking care of all of them and kind of looking over everyone. So he's an interesting character, but you know, in terms of being iconic from like an action perspective, he's probably the one that stands out.
I was going to say, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask a different question. So if you want to tag on that, go ahead.
Well, I had this interesting thought just now, and I don't think it's a breakthrough thing, but I was thinking about the fact that one thing that is maybe overemphasized a lot, but maybe not really when it comes into how war worked in World War II and stuff like that, is there's a lot of obviously men who are dying, but there's a lot of focus on their letters and making sure that their letters are taken from their bodies and that are passed on. And I think that's a really interesting way that Spielberg showed how connected this brotherhood is, because I don't think it's a mistake that Caparzo's and Wade are the first two to die, because Caparzo's letter is ruined. And basically Wade rewrites it. And essentially, more than likely, Wade puts that in his pocket. And then when Wade dies, they take the letters. Now it's more Wade and Caparzo's letters out of Wade's pocket now. And because Wade was willing to rewrite that, more than likely, I lost the chain of like who died and where the letters are and everything after that. But more than likely, Caparzo's letter was carried on till the very end, and his family got that. Just because that is such a big thing in their mind, is to make sure that their final thoughts are passed on to their family.
Yeah.
It's one of the ways we can like interact with it in history, that these letters made it through, and that's how we know a lot of what happened anecdotally.
Yeah. I also think this movie does have there's a little bit of levity here and there. Like there is some stuff that is pretty funny. Even the first scene where he meets the guy who he thinks is Ryan, and he's telling him like, yeah, your brothers are dead. And he's just like, how are my brothers dead? Like
Nathan Fillion. I was like, that guy looks so familiar. Like, who is that? And Leah's like, I think my wife's like, I think he's on like one of those murder shows. Like, I was like, oh, Castle. That's Nathan Fillion. Yeah.
Yeah.
He looks so different.
But there is like enough like there's levity here that feels like it just comes out of these guys being good friends and having this brotherhood together and really knowing each other. And I think that helps the story. I like the way they actually find Ryan. I think that's such a cool scene with the half track going by, and it's the airborne or the 101st guys shooting at it, and Tom Sizemore's like, who's shooting?
Also, because it's unexpected.
Like, yeah,
it's unexpected because you expect them to get to a destination and to find Ryan there, but you're just like, oh, another random thing, like the machine gun nest is happening, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's Ryan. He's right there.
Yeah, and I think those guys in the 101st, the concept of what they did in terms of the amount of people that were just dropped into the area, and they were all over the place. People would end up, you're at the whim of the wind, basically. People would end up way behind enemy lines, and like there were so many little pockets of these guys just trying to stay alive. It's insane to think about. And I like how you feel the chaos of it. Like they're just scattered.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know where anybody was. It's just a really interesting premise. But I think it's nice that it kind of pays homage to that unit, because they were really, really important too. So
yeah, it's a very good ensemble cast. This is, again, kind of like A League of Their Own, where you have a bunch of really like hot actors at the time, like hot, and not just physically. I mean, like as far as to cast, although some of them are definitely very cute. With an anchor in this like Tom Hanks coach, teacher, mentor, that like it really works. I love seeing ensemble casts. It's not always an easy thing to pull off.
And I guess the thing that was crazy too was that Matt Damon wasn't a big name while they were filming this.
No.
It's Good Will Hunting came out right before this movie. So everyone's like, man, I can't wait to see what he's in next. And then he was in Saving Private Ryan, and he's Private Ryan. And I know that story came out very recently, and we just talked because, I mean, he might be my favorite actor of all time. So I love talking about him in the last two movies. But the fact that Robin Williams actually got Matt Damon this role, because I think Good Will Hunting was filming, I think it might have been in DC, the same city as, I think they're shooting a scene for Amistad for Steven Spielberg's film. And Robin Williams asked Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and was like, hey, do you want to go meet Steven Spielberg? And obviously they were still young at the time, didn't have the names that they do now. And they're like, hell yeah, I want to go see Steven Spielberg. So they met him, and Steven Spielberg basically didn't recognize Matt Damon because he had seen him in a previous film. I'm trying to think which one it was. It was a war film that basically he was super thin, and he didn't think that he was going to be perfect for the role anymore because he wanted someone who was much more stockier. But then when he was able to now see him, he's like, oh, like, you're not what I thought you looked like anymore. So you're perfect. You're Brian. This is who I want, kind of a thing. So, I mean, there's lots of other things. Like, I think Edward Norton was originally going to be Saving our Private Ryan, but then he got cast in Project X, or American History X. My bad. Okay. So yeah, not Project X. So, and then, I mean, there's a lot. Billy Bob Thornton was going to be, was it Sizemore's character. I guess Sizemore had a big thing about the onset drama about this movie was that Sizemore actually had a huge drug problem, and Spielberg would constantly make him test. And Spielberg said, if you test positive, then you're going to be off this movie. So that was a big thing. But then also, I'm just all over the place here with my fun facts, but I think this was a smart decision, was the fact that Matt Damon did not participate in boot camp with the other actors, because they wanted the other actors to resent Ryan just like the film, or Damon just like Ryan in the film. So that's a very smart and easy decision that really worked. And then Spielberg even said that the reason why he did that was not to put them in not to get them physically trained for the scenes, but more is for them to respect the process that these soldiers went through. So.
Yeah, and Spielberg likes to have a cast that feels cohesive and before filming. Like, you'll see him do that with Goonies, where he had all the kids constantly hanging out. Even though that's Columbus, he did have a lot of work on getting that feel, the pre-feel. And like, yeah, that just makes sense. They didn't know Ryan. He shouldn't have been part of their boot camp at all.
Man, I love the Goonies. We got to talk about that movie. I love that movie
so much. Movie. Yeah.
But I was telling Dan, though, I'm not a genius move here at all, but something I noticed on this rewatch that I was curious if Dan was going to talk about in his video about Upham, because I feel like Upham is such a big conversation about this movie.
Yeah.
Is that I think there's a very, very purposeful decision that Spielberg makes towards the end of this movie, where the final battle is about to happen, and Upham is talking with the three other soldiers, and still after all this time together, they still call him weird. Like, when he's like describing, I believe the song is in possibly French, and he's like saying what's going on, all this stuff. And like, man, you're freaking weird still, right? Even after all this time, they still don't see him as one of their own. and he sits down alongside them. He doesn't sit down with them. He sits down. The framing is 3 of them are on the right on the stairs, and then Upham's kind of on the left on the floor or on the street. And what is dividing them is 3 perfectly positioned rifles. And I think that's to say, like, that's the difference here. That's what separates these guys. Is Upham will never be like them until he kills someone, until he knows what it takes to be in this war. And I think maybe by the end of the movie, he's at that point when he is willing to kill Steamboat Willie, Nazi. But, by that time, everyone thinks he's a coward. So
it does feel a little late, a little too
yes.
late.
And Dan, I didn't know there was that much confusion, but it makes sense about the whole, like, everyone thinks that Steamboat Willie is that one guy that, Upham could have killed. Yeah, they do look similar, but the one thing that, like, sticks out to me, I was like, that guy put his hat back on, his helmet back on, and the guy at the end doesn't have a helmet. Steamboat Willie doesn't have a helmet. But yeah, they aren't the same, but I didn't realize that was so much confusion about that.
Yeah, I think, and I talked about it, but it's important because that guy's in the SS, which are like, the Wehrmacht, like the German army, where they're Nazis in the German army 100%, but there's some of them were just guys that were fighting in the German army. They may have not ideologically been Nazis, but the SS were all on board fully. And him killing the only Jewish member of the team in the way that he does, like, is very poignant, I think. So, but yeah, people on TikTok are just like, oh no, it's the same guy, with, as if it's like a subjective opinion, but it's funny. But yeah, I just think this movie is, it's so good. It holds up really well. And I wrote about it, but my grandfather was in the 2nd Division. He landed on Omaha. He went to see this with my dad when it came out, and he said it was just exactly right. Like, it was like being there in terms of the realism. And he didn't really go see a lot of movies and stuff, but this pretty much, I think, really affected him and helped him, like, kind of start talking about the war more, which he never really did for a long time. So definitely just an important movie for veterans as well, that we're able to go see this. Pretty much everyone praised it in that way. So definitely important.
It's just crazy that Steven Spielberg was able to do this. I mean, obviously he does have, in his films, there's a lot of World War II and many of his pictures, Indiana Jones, Empire of the Sun. I think 1941, I think, is also a war film.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, you just think of like Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, E.T., these fun popcorn movies. Obviously, he did Schindler's List, but I just think it's really impressive that he has this much diversity to him. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have any closing thoughts on this?
I think you really hit it on saying that, like, this is an important film for people who have experienced it, because like we were saying with Philadelphia, there's an empathy that gets, bred in the viewer who can see and experience a thing that someone else has experienced. And this was definitely the first film I ever saw where I thought, like, oh, okay, I can empathize with what this might do to a person, not just because I'm seeing a war soldier who looks troubled, but because I experienced a few seconds of what might have troubled them. And like, oh yeah, okay. The futility, the morality, the, like, even if you choose right, it's still, you're going to get fucked. Like, all of that was the grayness. It was very interesting for me to see. And it holds up. If you haven't seen this movie, bless, go see it right now. Pause the podcast, go watch it.
Yeah, come back though. Come back, but
I
guess one thought I just thought of, I guess we had All Quiet on the Western Front last year or 2 years ago, but I feel like World War II movies were a huge thing for a while, and it's been maybe a little bit since we've had one. Is there, like, a modern day director that you guys would want to see do a film? Do we need any more films? Do you think, like, it's oversaturated? Like, would there be a market? Like, would you even want to see one? Because there's so many stories, so it's kind of hard to be like, where do you go, kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought I was almost done with, like, I don't know how many more Westerns or Western-based stories. And then Jane Campos does The Power of Dog.
Power of the Dog.
And so, like, so I'm like, maybe I would love to see someone like that, like a really out of left field, female director take on a war film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Stone, I think to answer your question just quickly, it's just about finding the right stories to tell, right? Like, there are so many stories to tell from so many people and so many countries. There's, you know, you can approach it from so many different angles, just about finding angles that haven't been approached before. But yeah, I mean, World War II, you know.
It's funny that you mentioned so many different countries.
Like, there shouldn't be more stories told about it, so.
It's funny that you mentioned so many different countries, because I guess the first movie that I thought of, which is like, that's kind of a World War II movie-ish, was Godzilla -1. I'm just like, that's the direct aftermath of it, you know, and from a different country's perspective. Obviously, it's kind of a wild, you know, that didn't happen, but that does, you know, have obviously very heavy influences in it. No, that's not.
They just announced they're going to do a second one with the same director. I'm hyped.
Yeah.
Pumped for that. I was actually looking up scenes for that movie yesterday. So, Dan, do you want to talk about The Road Perdition, because that was your pick, correct?
Yeah. This movie, I think, is very, very good. I've always kind of looked at it as one of the great all-time gangster movies, or maybe just like a cut below like some of the real, genuine classics. It doesn't quite get talked about as much, but basically sees Hanks as a mob enforcer who, with his son, witnesses a killing that wasn't supposed to happen. And we were just talking about, you know, the morality of Saving Private Ryan. This is another story very much about morality and loyalty and family, and, you know, all the decisions that come in regards to those things, and trying to do the right thing. But basically, Hanks goes on the run with his son, trying to evade the mob, and basically all the people that he kind of has dedicated his life to are now trying to kill him. And I think this is very good, and I think the last like 20 minutes are just absolutely incredible, and I think they bring this movie up a lot, because a lot of the rest of it is just, you know, it's good, but it's like relatively standard, I think. But towards the end, it just really picks up for me.
Yeah, I have to admit, this is another movie I hadn't seen yet. This is probably the one I have the least to say about, because I felt like it, like you said, Dan, it was just pretty standard. Like, I didn't know anything about this movie going in, like many of the other ones we've talked about today. But then I was just like, okay. I mean, pretty, you know, not a very shocking story. Makes sense. Mob guy, you know, dad works for him. Something happens, you know, they're on the run. So I feel like the story could only take me so far in my enjoyment of it. I will say, cast, didn't know who was going to be in this movie. Really good to see everyone in here, especially Stanley Tucci. I love Stanley Tucci. Go watch Conclave if you haven't seen Conclave. He's nothing. But then I didn't know Sam Mendes directed this. The score is incredible. I'm a sucker for a good score. It was nominated. Paul Newman also really great. I haven't seen a whole lot of movies with Paul Newman in it. Really cool to see him in this. He was fantastic. He was also nominated. But yeah, I don't know. The looming threat of Jude Law was very interesting. I didn't realize that was going to be such a big thing. He felt like he wasn't. I don't know. Like, I feel like Daniel Craig was. I don't know. Daniel Craig is like the MacGuffin, I guess, that drives this whole story, right? That's who they want their revenge on. But he's kind of just chilling the entire time. And it's really Jude Law, which Jude Law came from Stanley Tucci, which came from Paul Newman. It's kind of it's just weird how this is kind of structured, like who is coming after who and why. I will say I did like seeing Jude Law's face at the end. Totally forgot that he like got glass everywhere punctured. So when he's like looking at him, kind of horrifying. Which Jude Law is, again, like Antonio Banderas, is a very attractive man, especially this time.
Yeah, and he's willing to be very ugly in this movie.
Exactly, yeah, with his teeth and everything like that too.
And his like weird hairline.
Yeah, the story didn't go the way that I thought it would go. Like I said, it was standard, but still, I was expecting more Daniel Craig, and I don't like kind of how it turned out. I feel like the stakes could have been raised a whole lot more.
What do you mean by that?
I feel like Paul Newman was really an afterthought, and like how Tom Hanks really disposed of him. Like I said, Daniel Craig is kind of just there and he's gone. And even Jude Law, like I said, I kind of forgot about him, and then he's back again, and then he's just gone. I don't know. It just feels like this story is just, it's a road, right? It's a journey about these, this father and this son trying to get away and then come back to get their revenge. I don't know. Like I said, it's just the people I wanted to see more of, I didn't see enough of. I feel like this movie could have been longer, to be honest.
Yeah. I think Harlan, Jude Law's character, he's always there as a constant. He's always tracking them. And I think that is interesting because you kind of have a sense that he's never really going to stop. I think the Rooneys, I mean, this movie is really just about two sets of father-son relationships and understanding the sacrifices that each father makes for the son and the way that the son's actions directly or indirectly can land on the father as well. And I think Daniel Craig in this, it's a lot of, every performance here I think is really interesting because Michael Sullivan, Tom Hanks' character, again, not like a by-the-book likable guy. Like, he's a killer. He is brutal. That's his job. But he also cares about his kid. And I feel like a lot of this movie is him trying to put aside who he actually is. And I think even just, you get the sense that he hasn't even developed a relationship with his son at all. Like, he's learning the most basic things about him. Like, this journey is about him kind of like coming to even know him and like what he likes, what he dislikes, who he is, what his school is like. Like, they're teaching him how to drive. Like, they have the most basic, they're building like a basic father-son relationship on this journey. And he allows, you get a sense like he's just someone that has allowed his work to completely consume his life to the point where it's now driving his life. And I think in the Rooneys, it's kind of a different, and John Rooney was based on John Looney, who was actually a Chicago mobster who was a big deal. But he has a son who, he knows is an idiot and has grown up just so entitled and thinks he can do whatever he wants. But he also still loves him and he refuses to give him up. But he also looks at Michael Sullivan as a son, and maybe like the son that he wishes he had instead of his own son, and he ends up losing his life for that. I also just think like the way this movie is, you might think it's a typical story. The way it's shot is not typical by any means. It's very interesting. And like there's shot after shot where they're doing something unique. Even the opening with the first killing, like the shot from beneath his legs, like under looking through them.
That's good.
And the sequence where he goes after them, he has like a Thompson or whatever, and just kills everyone. Like that sequence is so well shot in the rain. And at the end, with the way they use the noise of the waves, it's so loud.
Very good.
And the way that entire shot is set up as well. I just think the way this movie is made is what sets it apart from a lot of movies that you might find similar. But also I think thematically there's a ton there, and all the performances are great as well.
Yeah. My grandfather worked for the New York mob as a construction guy. He would build houses, and that's how they would launder part of their money. And in our neighborhood, we grew up next to one of the hitmen. And there was always a constant struggle with my grandfather to keep my dad not involved. He did not want my dad to grow up and get involved in this. And bless his heart, like my dad's wedding song is the theme song to The Godfather. Like he kind of idolized it a little. And so like this film really kind of hits a trueness for me where I'm like, yeah, this is an aspect of it that I really appreciate, this desire to want to keep him at arm's length, which means that you can't really have a relationship with him. And then now that he does know, trying to quickly have that relationship, and maybe because it's called Road to Perdition, which is also a physical place, but like perdition being the state of not being able to get into heaven because you have sinned so much. I feel like the end was always going to be the end for me. And you're right, like we are plotting towards an inevitability. And Jude Law is like a marble that we've dropped very early on to maybe you forget about him, but he is the Grim Reaper who is always coming for us this entire time. The story itself is just almost a means to an end, but the coloring in between, the lines that they give each other, like when Paul Newman says like there's nobody but murderers here, the rain scene is so good. It gives you like a frise when you're watching it. Like I'm glad it was you. Like fucking Christ, that whole scene. Like you can get through with the cinematography, yeah.
I said you really just maybe just your explanation of the movie just then like really made me enjoy the movie a little bit, maybe a little bit more. No offense to Dan, he's all right, but that was really good though. Wow.
Thank you. I mean, it's in the first 40 minutes you could kind of think like, oh God, how long is this movie? And then right when you're saying, Dan, when they do that shot in between the legs from that point of view, you're like, oh. Okay. And then it just slides right down through the rest of the whole film. And by the end, it feels avant-garde with the way that they've decided to shoot and then the sound design with the waves. And for me to end on such a high note, it's like, yeah, this movie fucking rocked, even though it was a little slow.
Yeah. And I think just like even Michael, shooting him in the back and just doing one last thing so his son doesn't have to be a killer. Like it drives home the point of the entire movie. And I also think on some level you feel like if Michael had survived, it would have been nice in terms of the son has his father to continue living, but there always would have been a looming threat of maybe somebody comes back. Maybe someone from his past will be there and want revenge. And Michael Jr.'s life can never really start until his father is gone, because of all the things he has done throughout his life. And it just makes for, an interesting journey because, again, this is not like a cuddly character that you cheer for, but you cheer for his son. And his son is who the movie's actually about. And that's reflected in the last monologue or whatever. So, and I also think Daniel Craig is so good in this. This is like a weird role for him. He's very slimy and like such a coward and just unlikable. And this was Paul Newman's last movie. So I just think it's special in a lot of ways. And I really like the performance. I feel like he put so much into it.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Sir, I don't think that's correct. He was in Cars. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it was just like a short little cameo. Oh no, he plays Doc Hudson.
This was his last like live action performance.
Okay, sorry. Sorry.
Non-voice.
You know what I just thought of?
The Cars movies are terrible. So
also, so I just watched Cars 3 for the first time. Doc Hudson has a very Doc Hudson dies in that. And it's like his buddies that like, spoiler alert for anybody who's watched Cars 3. I thought Doc Hudson for a second was in that movie a whole lot, but that didn't make sense to me because Paul Newman passed away in 2008. But it's Doc Hudson's buddy. Sorry if anybody was not wanting spoilers for Cars 3 in this episode.
Oh man, I haven't seen Cars 1 and Cars 2. Is that going to ruin it as well? Like I don't know. What am I driving towards now?
Yeah, there's a weird fandom for those movies.
I think that Newman really does a good job of almost like making it a kind of Mice and Men level performance where like he knows his son needs to be put down, but like, is he really gonna do it? I really felt for him and that was very nuanced. He's not very much screen time, so I'm impressed by that capacity to get through.
Yeah. He, like I said, he was the only acting nomination, and then it's funny that you guys have mentioned the cinematography and sound so naturally. Like both, it was supporting actor, score, sound mixing, and then the one that it did win for was cinematography.
I always feel weird when I'm like, man, I want to talk about the sound in this film, but
yeah,
it's good.
I also think Stanley Tucci I didn't like what he was doing in Conclave at all. I think he's very good here. I did enjoy the performance, but Conclave was a different story.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, I love it. It's so good.
It is good.
It's a
He
good
just was
movie.
miscast.
I could have seen him being in this role. I could have seen that also being maybe Andy Garcia. I feel like maybe they kind of push back and forth, but I did like him very much in this.
I might have a hot take here. It's funny because this is who our episode's about. I think that maybe this could have gone to someone who wasn't Tom Hanks. Now, I do know that there is a very important element of this that works with him. It's that he's like a dad, and he has very much dad energy. Like you get that he wants to create this bond with his son. He's just a likable guy. That's the thing about Tom Hanks and just who he is as a person and an actor. There are sequences though where they're like, Sullivan, oh no, like this baddie, right? And it's just Tom Hanks, and I'm like, I don't really believe that people would be really that intimidated by him. I guess for what he's done, but I don't want to stereotype mobsters, I guess, but I don't. Tom Hanks doesn't scream that to me, so I think that's a very interesting casting decision. I wonder if anybody else was up for the role before him. I'm not sure. I don't think Sam Mendes and him really don't. I don't think they've done a whole lot of films together. I mean, I know Sam Mendes and Daniel Craig have, but
I also had a hard time watching this because he looks so much like Haley Joel Osment as an adult now. There's like a crossover. So there were a few scenes where I was like, is that Haley? No, it's Hanks. Pay attention. So yeah, there's a roundness to his features that make you feel like, could he be a killer? But you did need the dad. And this is also like, so he had all of this amazing run of hits and hits and hits and hits. And then he kind of goes into a like dead period and does a couple questionable things. He's more Toy Stories, the Da Vinci Code. And then there's this, which feels like a prestige film and him trying to be like, no, please take me seriously again.
Yeah. I also just think another thing that sets this apart from a lot of gangster movies is this violence, I think, is very real and cold and blunt, and nothing about this is like glorified. And I think that's important. And also sets it apart because, a lot of the story I think is very much an indictment of Michael Sullivan and like his actions. So I think if you want to do that, you don't really want to glorify the actual violence in the movie. I think that a lot of times movies like this fall into that trap. So another thing I liked about it.
What do you think about Hank's casting? What do you think about Hank's casting, Dan? Do you think that maybe someone else could have been better?
I like it because it's like a subversion of your expectations. Like
it's more realistic.
You view him as, and I hear what you guys are saying about how he looks, but like you go back and you look at a lot of these guys from like the mob in Chicago in the 1920s, like they're all relatively unassuming, a lot of them. And I think it's more about his believability as a killer. And I think that's set up really well with the scene that's kind of the catalyst for it when he goes and delivers the message, and the message is for that guy to kill him, and he kills those two guys like with ease. And I feel like you just get the understanding that he's not someone to be trifled with at all. And I think he's believable. But I think the, subverting the, Tom Hanks, nice guy persona works. I'm sure other actors could have done this, though. It's not like he's doing anything here that is transcendent. But I like that it takes advantage of what the audience thinks of him as you come to realize how kind of unlikable he is. So
yeah, I think it allows for the montage scenes with the kid to feel less abrupt. Like it kind of feeds in like, oh yeah, he would teach him how to drive the car. He would, the little conversation over the pie.
Awkward. Like it's like, oh, this goofy driving sequence in the middle of it. Like, I don't know. But he's able to do them.
Do either of you guys drive manual? Have you ever had to do that?
I was just thinking about that while watching this movie. I was like, I still don't know how to do that.
Bless! I learned how to do it in Ithaca, New York, which is full of ups and downs. So I almost the frustration and the reality of that scene, I was very much like, haha, yes, this is growing up, this is relatability. But yeah, it did feel like, wait, what are we doing in this 2.5-hour mobster movie? The kid was the weak point for me. I'm not sure the acting on the kid, and like given his age,
I
that's very
agree.
good for what he had. But there was a lot of like open mouth acting where there's just like breathing and staring, and I don't know if it's acting or simply being on screen.
Yeah. Do you guys have any final thoughts on this?
I am regret that I still don't know how to drive a stick shift. Not that my vehicle now is a stick shift, but
In the zombie apocalypse, you don't get to choose which car still has gas in it. Get your shit together, son.
that's the second time you've mentioned zombie apocalypse so far. We'll see. I'll be very shocked if you can like mention that while we're talking about here.
It comes in threes. My license plate is actually the word zombie, and I grew up with two other siblings who are super obsessed with zombies. We talk about like the reality of the capacity. My brother owns a parapropter because he thinks that's a really great way to escape the city should it become overrun.
Wait. What is that?
It's a large fan you can put on your back, and you can kind of fly a little bit. So he'll go from building top
That's
to
so
building.
cool. That's
I'm
hilarious.
calling it right now. I want there to be a here too, and it's just like the same place but during the apocalypse.
Oh, bless.
That would actually be
Yes.
really cool.
That'd be kind of dope, right? That'd be kind of sick. I still have like Hanks, but Hanks is a zombie.
Ugh, yeah.
I think with this movie, this is the one. I'll just be real. I expected to hate this movie. Like, to be completely blunt, I did not have any expectations going in. I don't like Zemeckis very much.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what he normally puts out. A lot of his stuff to me is just like super sappy in a way that doesn't really work for me, and just sentimental, and like I'm not a fan of Forrest Gump. I think Polar Express is an atrocity. Back to the Future movies, they're fine. I really like the first one.
You like Contact?
I do. Contact is I think it's his best movie. But yeah, I liked this, which surprised me. And I liked it at the same time. I think it's really, really flawed. I think this script is like kind of terrible, frankly. And I think there's stuff here that was supposed to be funny that I literally just kind of blankly stared at and just felt absolutely nothing. No one in my theater, I think, laughed. And I will say, there were people in my theater. There was like a good amount of people there, which was surprising to me. Nobody laughed really at anything. But I think the stuff that was heavier emotionally did work. And I found myself interested in these characters and not blown away from like a filmmaking perspective, but interested enough in certain moments and certain decisions that like I was on board. It was a strange experience for me, but I enjoyed it. I think more than you guys probably. So I'm curious to see what you have to say.
I mean, I like Katie. Go first.
So I think that the key to how much you might enjoy here is in how much you know the graphic novel. I didn't know Thing 1 going in, and coming out, I went and I looked into it, and when I did, I was like, oh, okay. So we're adapting the actual way in which the graphic novel portrayed its visual landscape. That being said, I do think it's important to note that I showed up about 5 minutes after the movie started due to traffic, and I had to sidestep 4 people who were already leaving because they were like, fuck this movie.
Did you miss the dinosaurs? Did you miss the dinosaurs?
I missed the dinosaurs.
No.
I did miss the dinosaurs, but I showed up, in time for Benjamin Franklin. For me, there's so many points in which I could see this being a movie I liked, but I genuinely felt like I felt like I had locked in syndrome, and a community theater was parading Norman Rockwell paintings in front of me.
That's good.
Like I wanted to like it. And I've been to the Norman Rockwell Museum. There was a schmaltz factor. And at the end, when it starts to become, obviously, because we're watching these whole people's lives, we're going to see people be born and we're going to see people be die. When it starts to get heavy, it felt like it was borrowing from my own life experiences where like my husband's aunt left his uncle and then got Alzheimer's, and then they had to get back together because she didn't remember having left him, and he has to take care of and love this woman who tried to leave and wishes she could have left and didn't want to come back. So I'm crying because I'm like, yeah, that's Aunt Kathleen. But am I crying because that's Robin Wright? I don't know if it earned it. I feel like it definitely reminded me that life is complex and sad and beautiful, but I'm not sure it demonstrated that.
Yeah, but it connected a lot. I was say it connected a lot with me. Just it's funny. I feel like anybody can watch this movie and have like a personal connection to it because it is just about different points of life. Like for me, I just moved and there's a lot of financial stuff with me and my wife right now, just trying to like budget and everything like that. And there's this, we want to get a house and maybe we couldn't get a house and all of this conversation. That's when I was the most invested with because I was like, oh, I'm thinking about saving for a house right now. And will this be me? Stuff like that. And I think that's cool that anybody can find a part of themselves in this movie because I mean it is just life, but I think that's basically all the movie has maybe going for it. It's so funny. I want to explain this maybe as simply as possible. I do not like the story structure of this, how it goes out of order. I don't like that, but the way that the story is told, it has to have that.
Yeah.
I was thinking because there's like this. I think the newest family. Maybe living in because you have the black family who it looks like moved in after Tom Hanks moved out. But I think the sequence when he revisits with Robin Wright is after that family has moved out. I think that's
the house is empty at the end.
The last thing. I found myself really invested in their story, and I feel like I didn't get enough of it. And then there's, like Dan was saying, like there's some comedy elements that they're trying to do. Everything with the lazy boy. I didn't need that, and that didn't go. That was all for comedy, and something that I found very interesting, as I was trying to pay attention, and I think in that sequence he says 1942 is going to be the best year ever in the Lazy Boy sequence, and I looked it up. The Lazy Boy was invented in the 20s, so not when it was made. It also made me think about the fact that the guy who invented the Lazy Boy evaded the World War II draft and didn't go. And he's just creating a chair. But none of that was true because the Lazy Boy was invented in the 20s. So that kind of messed with me. But I didn't like the Lazy Boy segment at all. Like I said, I wish I would have gotten something else. And everything with like, there's just stories that didn't interest me. Like the guy who died of the flu rather than dying in a plane crash. Okay. I really wasn't invested in that story either.
So I think maybe I might be able to talk about some of this. I think what the story is trying to do is there are through lines that connect every single thing here. Nothing here is like random or not having meaning. So I think, first of all, I think when you actually look at this story, it's a movie about the constants that are in humanity from the beginning of humanity to the future of humanity. It's the happy moments, the sad moments, death, life, joy, love, every single aspect of it. I think disease too, like there's a lot of references to COVID. They tie that into the influenza. They tie that in with the girls that are doing the nursery rhyme. That's like disease is a decent part of this story. I think the main part of this story is passion in regards to purpose. And I think the entire point of that sequence, the family with the guy who wanted to fly, is he was still pushing. That was his passion. That was what he wanted to do. And his joy was derived from that. And I think when you tie that into the present with Tom Hanks, like his passion was his painting. And when he gave that up, he kind of lost his way. And when he was able to come back to that, that's kind of when his life started picking back up. And then I think you see the same thing with the inventor. Like that was his passion, and his wife was equally invested in that passion. And the reason they were the happiest couple in this story, I think, is because they were both on the same on the same like wavelength, and they were both so invested in that, and like you could see their energy around the product. And it might be like a silly, goofy thing, but like they're the best couple in the story, and they're united by something. Then they're just on the same have the same way of thinking about it and level of investment. So I feel like that kind of passion through line is probably the most important aspect of what this has to say in terms of how can you actually be happy in life. And you see the same thing with Robin Wright. Her passion was not being like addressed. She wanted to travel. She wanted to see things. She wanted to do other things with her life. She like that house to her was just like a cage. It was just like a box she was in. And while it may have been a good relationship when they did love each other, she wasn't being herself, and she wasn't actually living her life. And when she got to do that, even though she ended up with a terrible disease and all, like, she did get to have the life she wanted to have, and he got to have the life he wanted to have by going back to his love in art. So I think it's kind of a like cluttered mishmash of things, but I think that's what the movie was trying to do, at least in some way.
So how do you interpret the ending where she turns around and she says that she loves it here, that she remembers the beautiful parts instead of the desire to leave so much?
I think it's a little bit of a strange ending all around. Like it's definitely an odd ending. It's odd to process, even in that, like, are they together now again? And are they together because she has also, like, it was a little bit odd. But I think what it was trying to say is what we're watching, it's just a space, right? It's just a piece of land, it's just a house, etc. But I think it just shows the power of a home, and like a power of like generations being in the same home, and the amount of memories that can be triggered from that. And like you can find, there are negatives about it, and they did go through difficult times, but there are positives, and like the power of a space is a lot. My grandparents met in the town that I was born in when they were like 15. They were together their entire lives. They were in the same house for 60 years. That house is 2 blocks down from where I grew up. So I was there all the time. My grandfather passed away when I was a senior in high school, and then my grandmother stayed in that house, and she was going blind. And it was a big space, but she couldn't leave because she had so many memories associated with that place. And I just think it's easy to say from an outside perspective, like, just go somewhere else. We said, move in with us. We'll figure it out. But like, it's so hard to walk away from a place where all your memories are associated with it. So I've kind of seen that in a very particular way, so I think I understood it in a way, but this movie isn't going to work for everyone as well. And like it's all about kind of like what you were saying in regards to your personal experiences. Like if you can't have that emotional connection with the story, you might just be better off leaving, just walking out of the theater. And I would totally get that. Like a lot of people aren't going to like this, but some people are really going to like this. So I think it's interesting. But yeah, this script is kind of rough, but I did end up liking it overall.
Yeah, like
I also think.
Go
ahead. I was going to say that I think that the use of AI really fucks with the acting performances in this.
I have a crazy take.
Yeah.
I think that Paul Bettany and Tom Hanks should have been switched.
Oh, yeah.
Because
sure.
I think Paul Bettany has such a youthful looking face for his age that him actually passing off as a young guy is a lot more believable than however old 75, however old Tom Hanks is. And then I know that he's a big selling point, Tom Hanks being of this movie, but Paul Bettany's in a lot of this film. So you still could have gotten a lot of him in this. I think Robin Wright is good though. But yeah, that's my one hot take.
I feel like you're robbing the actors of a major tool in their toolbox when you smooth and change their face, because they gave performances that are then altered. And so a lot of Robin Wright feels flat, especially when she's very early on. Plus the way that we're filming with this consistent shot, we're given a lot of like mid full, like we don't get the face performance. We get what feels very like a theatrical. I could see this being a production where Paul Bettany and the chick from Yellowstone, I can't remember her name, I'm sorry,
Kelly Riley.
Switch out with Robin Wright and Tom Hanks. And sometimes you see the performance with them as the older people, and sometimes you see the performance with them as the younger people. Like, I think that this works as a graphic novel. I think this works in a lot of mediums. I'm just not sure film is one of them. And I'm not sure having cinematography that doesn't change or add to the capacity of the actors, and then also putting AI on top of that, makes it a thing that I say, like, this is a good film. Like, it's a story, and I don't think that the medium lifted it.
I also think like not changing the camera angle at all lended a lot to using ADR.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought there was a lot of it in this because you cannot see their faces, so they're just like, we can just record. It doesn't matter. Like, you can really easily do it in a lot of these scenes, and I felt like it was very obvious. But yeah,
the one in like the 80s where they were doing the like jazzercise type thing, the ADR was like,
that was very bad. Yes,
I was like, yo,
the two girls. Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah, that was.
I will say
that was the most noticeable for me.
I had fun though, like trying to put together the pieces, because it's wild. Because you were just talking about your grandparents today, I'm like how long they've lived in the house, and obviously, it shows millions and thousands of years old, the Earth in this film. But the fact that there's really only been 5 or 6 families in this home, and like trying to piece together, like, so you have like, the Native Americans, and then what's his name, Benjamin Franklin, and then the airplane people, and then the Lazy Boys, and then Paul Bettany, and then Tom Hanks, and then the Black family, and then Tom Hanks again, and that's like it. Which I thought it was really fun.
How we're not that far removed from any period.
Exactly,
and that is, people don't understand. I think people lose track of that, and like, we are not that far from the Civil War. Like, it's a few generations. Like, at the end of the day, so.
I was just talking about that with watching Saving Private Ryan with my wife last night. I was like, I cannot believe that if I lived like 100 years ago or 80 years ago, like I would have been there. Like, that's just wild to think about. Like, obviously, I'm thankful for them doing that, but I'm also very thankful that I wasn't alive during that time.
Yeah. It's weird for Americans because we'll go to Europe and we'll be like, how long ago was this building built? Because for us, if it's like 50 years, we're like, whoa, crazy.
That's a good. I will say something that was funny though. It's just like this little thing, but it happens towards the end of the movie where you get that scene of the mirror and you get to see the kitchen table, and I was like, whoa, there's a table there.
I feel like I was in the Butterfly and the Diving Bell. Like, thank God for the table.
It's so funny because they have like Thanksgiving on like a pull-out table, even though their kitchen table is right there. Which I guess, traditions are traditions.
It would have been all the way long. I grew up in a very similar situation where my house was my grandmother's house, and my dad had his first kid when he was 18, and we just didn't leave. And like, my grandmother died and we got the house. We never left. Like, I saw my mom and Robin Wright so much, and I had heard so many of those conversations, and it was only slightly older than I would have been, maybe by like 6 years. So there's definitely a demographic for whom I think you can really latch on to the story and identify with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think, I honestly feel like the character that might be the most important to the story is Al. Because I feel like when you look at him coming back from the war, in his eyes, I guess kind of thanklessly, becoming an alcoholic, most likely because he doesn't deal with what he saw in the war, and then just having to go to work. But like, his mindset and his outlook on life and everything steers not only his family, but it steers the next generation as well. And he ends up, his like eventual reintroduction into the home ends up driving out Margaret, and it causes turmoil there. And Tom Hanks's Richard is feeling an obligation to Al to take care of him. But like, I just feel like so much of the conflict in the story is a direct result of like his behavior and inability to change, and stubbornness, and stupidity and his flaws. Not that he's a character to like hate, but he's very human, I think, in that, and it shows you how one person can have such an impact on so many different lives.
Do you think Lazy Boy got money for this?
You can't say their name without it. Yeah, I mean, like the way I've been on set where like I have to have a writer for every single tattoo that I have, and they're not even brands. Like people will sue over everything. You can't show or mention anything.
Well, what an interesting brand to have in this film. I guess it was comedic from Robert Zemeckis' perspective. I didn't really find it that funny, but
it's a good way to get some extra funding.
I will say the chair was. Oh, speaking of funding, how expensive do you think this movie was?
$50
million.
Did you guys both say fit? You guys both guessed it. Holy shit!
I was just talking about how Dusk Till Dawn cost $19 million, so I was like, God, it's got to be at least 2 Dusk Till Dawns.
That's ridiculous in my opinion. Yeah, if you eliminate that CGI, then I feel like you don't have. I guess the dinosaurs are fun. You don't gotta have the dinosaurs in this. You really don't.
The Native American scenes felt like
they felt very fake. Scene. They felt very fake.
Like a video game cut screen.
Yeah, they didn't look good. They didn't look good at all.
Yeah, there's just a definite hokiness to this movie. Yeah. For a while, I was like, man, I kind of hate this, but I hit a point where I just kind of, it flipped a switch for me, and I was like just on board because I just became invested in the characters and their story. And like, I always, I think, tend to lean towards characters and that type of storytelling and like really character-driven stuff, dialogue. Like that's what I like personally. So I think I was able to just like really get invested in that, and there was enough like empathetic recognizability here in the story for me to care, I guess. But some people are going to watch this and be like, I don't give a single fuck at all. So,
and I'm here for the cinematography. So like that was always going to be a problem for me if I'm going to show up and be like, you know what? I love the way that things are shot. And they're like, oh, and as a filmmaker to be like, oh man, you just have to set up that camera once. That's good shit. I appreciate how easy that is. I do enjoy it. But if there's a cinematographer listed on this film, I feel like maybe they shouldn't be.
Don Burgess.
I wish one time one of the characters would have just looked at it. Just right into it. Just for a split second. Just like
for a split second.
That would have been good. But I will say one thing that's funny too when you're like depicting this like someone's entire life is like the stuff that you don't explain. Like I think I remember the parents move out because they're going to move to Florida or something like that. This is Paul Bettany and the wife. They're moving. And I think Tom Hanks' siblings still live there, I believe. And then they're just gone. And I'm like, well, how'd that happen? Like, why does he get the house? Why don't they get the house? Like, where'd they go? I mean, it's just like never explained. I mean, that's a very little thing that doesn't matter. But when you show someone's entire life, it kind of matters. I guess one of them went to the war. Or
I think that was explained.
Navy.
Yeah.
And then he did say that he gave them a bunch of money that he had gotten. Like instead of getting the house, they got money.
They had a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind.
It's quick. It's very quick. It is very like yada yada. The house is yours and they are gone.
Yeah. There's a lot of life.
Yeah. It's going quickly.
But I think what you said, Katie, like if you don't like theater, I would just say straight up, don't watch this.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, just don't watch it. So
no. And I guess I'm a little bit conflicted again with the casting choice here. And this is part of why I don't like the AI de-aging or aging. First of all, I love special effects and I love special effects makeup, and I would love to see a special effects artist get hired to do this, and that would have been better. But also, I feel like we are robbing ourselves of a new generation of actors if we're just going to keep our older actors and de-age them for as long as we possibly can. Like this could have been Tom Hanks later and someone else younger, and we could have met a new actor or given a role to somebody.
I mean, we talked about Saving Private Ryan, and everyone talks about the fact that whoever they cast the older actor for Matt Damon is spot on. It really is. So there's someone out there who is a younger actor who looks like Tom Hanks. They just don't care to find him.
I think it's his son too, like just throw a tissue. He's right there.
But whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm like at a 3 out of 5, 2.5 out of 5 right now. Like I said, there is that one moment about the helm where I'm like, you know what? I'm going through the same thing. You know what? I feel that.
I was at like a 1.5, 2, and then I saw the graphic novel, and then I became a 2.5. Because once I understood the impetus and the choices that were being made, they didn't work for me. But you know what? I really enjoyed that somebody took a big swing, and that if this is what they were going for, they fucking nailed that. Didn't work for me personally, but I can understand a little bit more. And I think that if you were interested in seeing the movie, I would encourage you to just look at a couple of stills from the graphic novel. You don't have to read the whole damn thing, and it'll give you a little bit more to go on.
Yeah, I gave it the lightest 3.5 of all time. Very close to a 3, but I did like it. So I'm always surprised. Like, I feel like when I expect to hate something, I was just very surprised, and I was trying to be honest with myself. Like, okay, did I really dislike this, or am I just thinking I was gonna dislike this? But I was like, no, you actually like it. So I just, yeah.
I had a bunch of friends who said it was the worst film ever, and I feel like that really set me up for like, oh, it's not that bad.
Yeah, some people are gonna.
Yeah, low expectations are good. Low expectations are good because it can really only. That's why I tell everybody like working, because I work in the hospital. Everyone's like, it's so like it can be very stressful. But I always tell people, if you go in thinking it's going to be the worst day ever, it can only get better.
Yes,
it's really the truth.
Pleasantly surprised. Exactly.
I will say. I know we're. I know we stopped.
Keep cutting you off.
I know we stopped talking about Tom Hanks, but it's really funny because we're like, yeah, this. I can't remember his name in the movie, but he's like, yeah, he just got done with high school, and I'm like, he looks 50. He looks 50 right now. I couldn't ignore that.
It's really hard, but if you're doing theater, you're like, okay, maybe I'm like a couple rows back. I could feel that.
Sure.
And people are saying this is the worst film of 2024. And I really feel like, girl, did you see Long Legs? Like, there's plenty of worse.
Hot take.
Shots fired.
No, it's Borderlands for me. That's my worst film of the year.
But. Oh, yeah, I didn't know. I live in a world where that's not. No. Oh, God. Yeah. I didn't see either of those. I'm blissfully unaware.
Are you excited for Chapter 2, Dan?
No.
Dan, what is a movie that you're excited about that you can share with our audience that you want to recommend for them this week?
I watched Lady Snowblood yesterday, which is movie that Quentin Tarantino kind of ripped off for Kill Bill. It's streaming on HBO Max. Very highly stylized revenge story. Really entertaining, really well shot. Awesome performances. I really enjoyed it, and I didn't realize it was on Max, but it is. So go watch it if you like Kill Bill.
Nice.
Do you have one that you would recommend, Katie, that maybe people haven't seen a whole lot of? A film?
Oh, God. A film. You know what? The thing that I have been bothering people to watch is actually not a film. It's a TV show. I've been bothering people to watch Scavenger's Reign. I think it is the best sci-fi world building I have seen pretty much ever. It is superb. It's beautiful. It's not getting a second season. It's just, maybe they'll do that thing where like a couple of years later somebody comes in. But, that and Blue-Eyed Samurai are two things this year that really just hit me sideways as being superb television in an episodic way. And so a lot of people missed Scavenger's Reign. It was on Max. They dropped it. It's now on Netflix. It's really worth your time. It's so beautiful. It's so creepy.
Yeah, I heard that was really good. Blue-Eyed Samurai is getting a second season, though, right?
Blue-Eyed is, yes.
Okay.
And I think it's going to be shorter than the first season, and it's going to take a couple of years because animation, but they are going to get a second season. It was too good.
You know what? I'm going to piggyback off of you, and I'm also going to recommend a show because the second season's about to come out. I know Dan hasn't watched it. Severance. Severance is so good. It has one of the wildest plot twists. The final episode is like, it takes some time to get into. So basically, very short synopsis, but basically it's this this company that has this program where you can sever your personal life and your work life. So basically your personal life, you have no idea what goes on at work, but then at work, you have no idea what goes on in your personal life. So essentially you are two different people. So it's very interesting for two reasons, is that it also has a great cast. Like I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like John Turturro's in it, Christopher Walken, Adam Scott is the main character of the film. Also, who's the boss? I'm blanking on the actress.
Patricia Arquette.
Patricia Arquette's the boss. Like it's stellar cast, but there's two interesting things. What's crazy is I don't want to get into spoilers, but it's finding out what the company does, but then also you have no idea who any of these people are on the outside. So, and what about their lives made them want to do this?
Yeah.
And finding that out throughout the course of the film or the show is very interesting. And they barely even got into like what the company is about. So I feel like there's so much more material that they have in store. And the second season comes out in January. But then also I think like the showrunner of this is Ben Stiller as well.
Yes.
Which is super cool. And I think it's on Apple TV Plus, which Apple TV Plus is notorious for not marketing their stuff very well, but also having very good content. So this fits that. So Apple TV, if you're watching, send me a screener, stuff like that,
little things. I love that show, and I watched it as it came out serially, and I was working in an office at the time, and like I called what was the reveal at the end of the first season. So when it gets revealed, I was watching with a bunch of friends. I was like, just screaming, like,
it is so
good.
The end episode is insane. It's so good. Sorry, Dan. Okay, that's it.
That's okay.
Did you know
I need to watch
that the Gary Marshall character in A League of Their Own was going to be Christopher Walken, but they couldn't afford him?
Oh, that would have been good.
Yeah, it's been different.
I love Christopher Walken.
Me too. I wasn't actually allowed to watch his movies growing up because my grandfather and him had an actual real life blood feud where my grandfather beat him up a lot as a little kid. And so we were like never allowed to watch his movies. So I had to watch them all as an adult.
Was this your grandfather that built the houses for the mob?
No, this is my sister.
Your grandfathers are wild. That's sweet.
Yeah, no, there's a joke that at some point, all the men in my family have gotten into a fist fight with somebody, and then that person becomes famous later on. So Christopher Walken when we were younger, and then my dad's best friend is Ron Jeremy, and they got into a fist fight, and they're not friends anymore. But like, my brother beat me up a lot as a kid, so I'm like hoping I'm the one who gets it.
That's good. I was gonna say like I should come like visit your family and be like, hey, what's up, guys? But Katie, please tell. Like you've hinted at it, but you're a filmmaker, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And please just as we're ending this episode, please promote your stuff. Tell everyone anything about you that you want to share.
Well, if you're listening to this and you like going onto YouTube and watching short films, my first short film is a body horror film. So if you're not into body horror, do watch yourself. It is 34 minutes long, and it is an allegory for the type of personality that gets attracted to anorexia and how that plays out in their life through body horror. Because body horror, I think, is a really great medium. You can see it in the substance for talking about more intense, deeper kind of social commentary. That's free, totally available. If you go to my YouTube movie runtime, that's also my TikTok. You can get that there. I also have a 5-minute comedy horror short about the haunted house that I currently live in. Most of what's in the short is actually what is my life experience. We got this house for really cheap because it used to be a church for a now defunct form of Christianity. And there's a religious pulpit in part of it. There's a lot of parts where you're like, oh yeah, this is a haunted house. And stuff goes nuts all the time. Like clocks will go off in the middle of the night for no reason. The wall behind me just melted for one. It just literally seeped water. There's no leak, but it was soaking wet and fell apart. Things will fall off the walls, stuff like that. But we're just like, it's such a good deal for a house. We just live with it. So fine.
If any ghosts are listening, you can melt her wall right now. That would be some great content for us.
I was like, wow.
Yeah, light it on fire. Anything you want. We'll compensate Katie for the views we get on the wall melting.
Yeah, I'm gonna need a new roll of this wallpaper. And other than that, you can see me in a lot of movies. I'm a background actor in the Boston area, so you will find me in movies, and I'll forget that I've done movies. So I'll be watching a movie and be like, "Oh yeah, fuck, I'm in that one." Like, you can see me behind the bar in Manchester by the Sea when they deck KT Affleck. That really happened. That was the best day of my life. I got paid for a full day, but only had to work a half because they broke his nose.
Damn, nice.
I guess we're using that shot.
So they needed to punch you though. You would have been the Casey Affleck who got the Oscar.
Casey, come on, pay for it. You could see me in the Purge election year as one of the Russian murder tourists who tries to kill the mayor. Little things like that. And I'm on Movie Night Extravaganza, which is a weekly podcast where we talk about whatever's in the zeitgeist in 2 weeks. So on the 15th, we're going to be talking with Adam McKay about his just general work, and it's just exciting to have him on the show. And tomorrow we're going to have Harry Marks from Intro in the Lobby talking to us about In a Lonely Place, which is his favorite Bogart film.
I think we've had him on the calendar for a long time because we're like, what's the perfect film? Because we obviously try to match somebody with what we're talking about. And I believe we're having him on for Nosferatu to talk.
He did the intro for my Nosferatu event.
There we go.
Yeah.
He got the voice, man.
Yeah. I played his little clip. I was like, no, who's going to say it succinctly and perfectly in 4 minutes? Fucking Harry is.
But
sorry?
No, go ahead.
And then the last thing I have to plug, because I'm always plugging tons of shit, is my own show. Which is called What If I Don't Like It? And again, that's a show where I bring people on, usually filmmakers, to take a look at a film that they rank on, or an actor that they rank on, but they actually haven't seen, and see if I can convince them to change their mind. And it doesn't always work. And sometimes someone comes on and challenges me because I have conceptions of what I think I know something is. We did From Dusk Till Dawn on my last episode, and it didn't go very well. Neither of us liked it. But so it goes. We also did There Will Be Blood, and we fucking loved it. So, you have to really tune in. It's not always going to be we rail the guest into liking it, and then they begrudgingly say they like it in the second half.
Nice. Jeez, I didn't realize you had that much stuff going on. So I appreciate you just finding the time to come on our podcast.
I'm always podcasting. So it's like, oh, you want to do another one? And I love your show. I really do. So to get to be asked to come on, I'm like, I want to talk with these guys. I'm always yelling back at you when I listen to you on my Bluetooth speaker. I'm like, oh, imagine if I actually had a microphone.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, we try to put a lot of work in it. And I'm glad we were able to, find an episode to put you on. But please, everyone, go check out Katie, all of her portfolio that she just described. Manchester by the Sea, the Purge election year. Maybe we'll have a Katie movie runtime themed episode where we just talk about her movies.
What's the short film called, by the way?
It's called Girl in the Basement.
Okay.
Which is not to be confused with the Hallmark movie, Girl in the Basement. I'm mad that 10 years later they just took the title, but I didn't realize my friend did the music for it, and she had written a song called Girl in the Basement. And when I'd heard it, I thought, oh, that's really good for the story that I'm writing. We combine them together. It turns out that she based it on a real life event that the Hallmark movie then made a movie about. So yeah. Cool. If you're looking at the guy from Breakfast Club, he's not in my movie. Nobody famous is in my movie.
You are. Hey, you are.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. But yeah, next week I think we're going to cover films surrounding Veterans Day. That was a special episode that we wanted to do, kind of in honor of Connor and his service that he's done for the country. So we're excited to be covering that. So everyone be looking forward to that. But yeah, well, he'll be back next week, obviously, for that episode. Again, thank you, Katie, for jumping on.
Absolutely.
But until this episode comes out, until next week, everyone, thanks for listening to us talk about our favorite things in the world, movies, and shows in this episode. But please go outside this week, touch some grass, sit on a park bench, and we'll see you then. Peace.